Good morning and welcome to the Propeller Club of Northern California. It is Wednesday, May 18th, and our subject matters today are it's our second Maritime Day panel, and our subjects are U.S. Inland Waterways and Great Lakes Reports is our first panel, and our second panel is Jones Act Carrier Reports, which will commence at 10:30. Before I introduce, I want to just mention that we had a very interesting session on Monday, the 16th, and we had some very interesting feedback. And some of that feedback, I just want to go over with you real briefly before I do the introductions. And that is that we heard from International President Jim Patti, who urged that the United States rebuild its merchant marine and reduce its dependence on foreign flag vessels, and particularly be focused on our dependence on China for transport of imports and exports. Jim was followed by Paul Snell, who's the president of British American Shipping, who focused on the need for improved infrastructure spending at ports. He particularly cited the issue of the lack of on-dock rail at many ports. He cited Oakland and Houston as two of them. I was just talking to Paul Matthews at the Port of South Louisiana, who is also focused on that issue at his port. Paul also talked about the fact that as a result of reduced sailings to the Port of Oakland, many Northern California and California exporters are not able to get their product out to market at the Port of Oakland and are either missing sailings or having to truck down to the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, where the trucking rate is $3,000 a container as opposed to $800 going to Oakland. Paul suggested that we consider a ocean feeder, a container feeder service between Oakland and LA Long Beach. And I was just saying to our participants, what a radical idea that we should start shipping some of our Jones Act, using our Jones Act carriers to carry our containers by water instead of by truck. And I said to Admiral Whitehead, you know, what is the country coming to if we're going to start having to really get serious about shipping on the water? And of course, we do that already for our inland waterways and for our Great Lakes uses, but not enough. And Steve Fisher, who I see nodding his head and smiling, will be talking a little bit about that from his perspective in a moment. Our next speaker was Lars Jensen, founder of Vespucci Maritime. And he said that if the United States is concerned about its role in commercial shipping, it should not have allowed its carriers to go out of business. It should have supported them. And he said that the focus on quarterly profitability makes it very difficult to compete in an international shipping market, especially when we know some of these other carriers, I won't mention any names, are backed by their governments. Bruce Jones, the author of To Rule the Waves and a Brookings Institute analyst, talked about how China has built up its shipbuilding and merchant marine with massive government subsidies to the point where it has become a dominant shipbuilder, a dominant ocean carrier, and is employing dual use applications for commercial shipbuilding and naval shipbuilding, and is beginning to challenge the United States in the Pacific, and has also expanded its deployment of container terminals, which sometimes have a dual use application as possible military bases. And he mentioned potential situations at Djibouti and Equatorial Guinea and in the Solomon Islands. Finally, Sal Mercogliano, Campbell University professor, reported that due to older vessels in the ready reserve fleet getting to the point that they are breaking down, we are going to need to have to think about rebuilding that fleet. He said that the US Navy has really focused on very expensive work of art vessels that has diverted much money towards very expensive naval assets and has ignored the ability of commercial shipyards to be competitive and perhaps produce some of the assets that we need, such as ro-ro vessels and container handling vessels. We also heard a short report from Bo Breistrup at C. Clausen and Company, who described how he had done a projection of US-built, US-manned ships from the port of Oakland to several Asian ports, in which it was possible for an export container to be shipped to Shanghai and Korea, Busan, Korea, and Yokohama, Japan for around $2,000. Bo's here with us. If you want more information on that, I will be happy to distribute Bo's report. And in addition, we talked about the $3,000 trucking rate between Oakland and LA Long Beach. Bo has done a projection of a 1,000 TEU container ship built in the United States with a US crew that could ship a container between Oakland and Long Beach for $1,625 as opposed to $3,000 by truck. And if anybody is about to say, what about the lift charges? We added $450 at each end as part of that $1,625 figure. And on that note, let me begin by introducing our guests. And I always start with my close comrade in arms, Todd Crawshaw. Todd, good morning.
Good morning, Todd Crawshaw, Crawshaw Design. We provide integrated brand marketing for print and web, premier web hosting, and IT support.
Thank you. Steve Fisher, good morning, sir. Need to unmute yourself.
Just did it. Thanks, Stas. Good morning. I am Steve Fisher, Executive Director of the American Great Lakes Ports Association. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us, Steve. And I have another Sault Ste. Marie story to tell you at some point about that other time, but well, I won't hold us up here. Tracy Z, good morning, Tracy.
Good morning, Stas. Thanks for having me. Tracy Z, President and CEO of Waterways Council.
Very good. Admiral Joel Whitehead, Executive Vice President, International Propeller Club of the United States. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here today and to welcome everyone to this presentation. I'm Joel Whitehead. I'm Executive Vice President of the International Propeller Club, which is an organization that is almost 100 years old and has worldwide membership. And we exist to support shipping and the maritime industry worldwide. I thank you all for joining us today for another in a great series of webinars sponsored by the International Propeller Club and our individual chapters around the world. Today's webinars were organized and are being hosted by the Propeller Club Port of Northern California, whose president, Stas Margaronis, will moderate both panels. Stas is the California Ports reporter for the American Journal of Transportation and is very well known to the maritime community. In our first webinar, our expert panel will address infrastructure needs on the inland waterways and Great Lakes. Three leading experts on this topic will be on our panel. Tracy Zia, President and CEO of the Waterways Council, Steve Fisher, Executive Director of the American Great Lakes Ports Association, and Paul Matthews, Executive Director of the Port of South Louisiana. Following in a second webinar, Stas will again moderate another great panel that will discuss a topic of critical importance to us all, the Jones Act. We will hear from Torey Presti, President of National Shipping of America, Nick Marrone, Vice President of the Seafarers International Union, Edward Washburn, Senior Vice President of Fleet Operations, Pasha Hawaii Transport Lines, and Ann McIntyre, Business Director of the San Francisco Bar Pilots. I hope you enjoy these webinars. Thank you to our host, the Propeller Club of Northern California, ably led by Stas Margaronis, and our expert panelists. Thank you.
Joe, thank you very much for that kind introduction. We will be recording this session. It will be available tomorrow, and it will also be available on the International Propeller Club website. Paul Matthews, good morning.
Good morning. How you doing, Stas?
I'm doing fine. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, Paul Matthews, Chief Executive Officer of the Port of South Louisiana. The Port of South Louisiana has consistently been known as the largest tonnage port in the Western Hemisphere, particularly on our grain and petrochemical products that are moved. Good morning and hello all the way from down here on the mighty Mississippi River in Louisiana.
Very good. Paul, thank you very much. And I see Peter Dreyfus. Peter, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Stas.
Want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer of Watermaster North America, and we are manufacturing a Jones Act compliant dredging vessel in Michigan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I see Amy Andrus. Amy, good morning. Amy, are you there?
Hey, good morning, everyone. I am not sharing my camera. I'm actually at home sick today and thought that I would join your Zoom. There's a silver lining in every storm cloud, right?
Amy, that's great. Why don't you give us a couple of sentences about who you are and what you do?
Oh, thank you. Well, Inland Rivers Ports and Terminals is a nationwide trade association. Paul Matthews is one of our members, and we're so proud of Paul and his role at the port. We're actually going to be having a meeting at his port on June 1st. But our members focus on river, road, and rail transport throughout the inland river system.
Very good. Amy, thank you very much for being with us, and please get better.
Thank you so much.
Okay. I see Mr. Bill Nixon. Good morning, sir.
Stas, how you doing? I'm Bill Nixon. I'm one of, if not the oldest tramp ship agent on the U.S. West Coast that specializes in bulk and dry bulk ships. And I'm a spectator in this container conversation. And Paul, maybe you know my colleague in New Orleans, Paul Clancy is Transmarine's longtime manager in the river route.
I remember that name very well, very well.
Thanks, Stas, for having me.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Mr. Bo Brystrup. Good morning, Bo.
Good morning, Stas. And thank you for inviting a non-American to your interesting discussion. I am a partner and director of a small Danish broker and consultancy firm, C. Clausen in Copenhagen.
Recording in progress.
And we have assisted Stas for many years in various projects. So that has been quite interesting. And I just did an update. The number that Stas gave, I should emphasize, is based on a lot of assumptions. But we believe, within fair range of reasonability. Thank you.
You're welcome. Welcome, Bo. And as I said, anybody who's interested in Bo's projections, I've got a copy and happy to share it. I see somebody with captain, a C and captain designation. Would they introduce themselves, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, my name is Captain Graylin Gant. My company, I'm the founder of Northwest Gulf Federal Pilots and also the Gulf Northwest Marine Transportation. So we're a company trying to get involved more with the port activity. As a captain, I've operated vessels in the upstream industry in the Gulf of Mexico, working with the oil and gas. So I want to thank you guys for inviting me to this meeting.
Captain, thank you very much, and you're very welcome.
Thank you.
I see Casey at Marine Exchange. Good morning, Casey.
Good morning, Stas. Good morning, everybody. I'm Casey Christopherson from the San Francisco Marine Exchange. I'm spectating today. Thank you.
Okay, welcome, Casey. Cheryl Rothbart, good morning. Cheryl?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I am the Associate Executive Director of the International Propeller Club here as part of the staff. Welcome to all of you who are here listening. All of these webinars provide so much valuable information, as we are we're the only association that represents every aspect of the maritime community. And so all of this networking is so important. So I thank you all.
Cheryl, thank you very much. Emily Sinclair, good morning, Emily.
Hi, good morning, Stas and everyone. I'm Emily Sinclair. I lead our corporate communications at the Pasha Group and for Pasha Hawaii, and I'm interested in learning more about our inland waterways. So looking forward to the presentations this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. My good friend, Mr. John Hark, good morning.
Good morning, guys. I'm John Hark, the regional director for German ship owner and logistics firm Bertling here in North America, and have been teaching for 20 years at Texas A&M at the Maritime Academy in Galveston.
And John, you and I have been talking about a big issue that we have not discussed in this whole discussion, which is workforce development and where are we going to get our next generation of engineers, both for ships and for operations and for propulsion systems, for manning. And you and I have also heard from the Seafarers that they're having a tough time attracting younger people into the industry. So for a lot of reasons, the work that you're doing at Texas A&M and our other maritime academies is very important, and you are very welcome with any comments you might have about workforce at the end of the presentations. Evie Wong, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good.
Evie Huang with Alba Wheels Up and president of Customs Brokers Forwarders Association and a proud member of Propeller Club.
And a board member.
Yes, and a board member. Somehow you got me on that, Stas. Thank you.
Thank you, Evie.
And I'm proud to be a board member as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having.
Okay. Jeff Vine. Jeff, good to see you again.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Vine from Port of Stockton in California.
Jeff, thank you very much for being with us again. I see my research assistant, Kevin Policarpo. Kevin, good morning.
Morning, Mr. Stas.
Good morning. And you're going to be doing a transcription of this, right?
Already recording the thing.
Very good. Thank you very much. Mr. Sung Lee, good morning, sir.
Hi, Stas. I am with SW Logistics. I'm a freight forwarder in Oakland, but I also am representing the District Export Council here in Northern California today. Thank you.
Very good. Welcome. And we're very pleased to have you. Owen Clark. Owen, would you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Stas. Glad to be here. Owen Clark, a former shipmaster and now Director of Government Affairs at Crowley Maritime here in Washington, D.C. I think as several know, we're the largest employer of U.S. merchant mariners, so we're acutely aware of the manpower issues and certainly appreciate all help on that area. I was also privileged last night to attend the Salute to Congress with the International Propeller Club and the Propeller Club of Washington, D.C., where we honored several mariners from World War II. So that was really quite a sight, and it was pretty special.
Well, thank you, Owen, very much for being with us. And obviously, your company plays a very important role in our U.S. flag business and hopefully in our U.S. flag future. I see, let me see. Robert Hahn, good morning, sir. Robert, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, Stas and everyone. Robert Hahn, Vice President of Maritime Affairs with the West Gulf Maritime Association, trade association covering Lake Charles, Louisiana, down to Brownsville, Texas, based here in Houston. And I'm also Regional Vice President for the Propeller Club.
And Robert provides a daily maritime news update from the West Gulf Maritime Association, which is absolutely essential if you want to stay abreast of things and have a reference point to do so. And Robert, if somebody wants to subscribe, what do they need to do?
Well, if they're not a member, but they are located within our region, then all they have to do is send me an email. Robert@wgma.org.
Okay. Anybody who's interested, please let me know. I'll be happy to forward that. And Robert, you guys do an excellent job, and thank you for your good work.
Thanks, Dawson. Thanks for putting out good articles that we can also share in our newsletter.
Well, thank you for doing that for me too. Susan Ransom. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning, everybody. Susan Ransom, Client Relations Manager for SSA Terminal in Oakland. We are the largest port stevedoring tenant here, doing about 70% of the maritime business through Oakland. Stas, loved your article on the turning basin. Thank you so much.
I was thinking of you, Susan.
It's perfect. I'm going to send it off to the port.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tracy Z.
I already introduced myself, Stas.
Oh, I'm sorry. I saw you at the,
Yeah.
the names keep going back and forth. I'm sorry. Todd, have I got everybody?
I believe so. Someone's coming in here. Captain Ann.
Oh, is Ann here? Ann,
Yes.
you want to introduce yourself? Ann McIntyre.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Hi, let me see. I don't know if my camera's working. Hi, Ann McIntyre here. I'm the business director with the San Francisco Bar Pilots.
And she will be speaking at the 10:30 panel. Ann, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Okay, so let me begin with our speakers, and we will have first Tracy Z, President and CEO, Waterways Council, Inc., Washington, D.C. He's going to be talking about the status of lock and dam improvements for U.S. inland waterways. And also there's a word on news that I'm hoping he will be sharing with us. Steve Fisher will follow him, Executive Director, American Great Lakes Ports Association. He's going to be talking about infrastructure priorities for the Great Lakes ports. And Paul Matthews will be the third speaker. He's the Executive Director, Port of South Louisiana. He will discuss how infrastructure investments support U.S. exporters. So on that note, Tracy Z, good morning and welcome. We can see your screen. Thank you.
All righty. Can you hear me, Stas?
Loud and clear.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for the invitation. Happy to be here. After going through all the introductions, I thought it would probably be even more beneficial for everyone to know who Waterways Council is, since we don't really operate in California, especially Northern California. Waterways Council, we are a Washington, D.C. based association that advocates for a modern, efficient, well-maintained inland waterways transportation system. So what does that mean? Locks and dams. We are on the smaller side of associations in Washington, D.C. standards. We are a $2.5 million budget a year. We have 5 employees, but we have 3 different locations. Our headquarters here in DC, where we have 3 employees, myself, our Director of Government Relations, then our office manager. We have a Vice President of Grassroots located in St. Louis, and then our Communications Director just recently relocated to Paducah, Kentucky. So we have the inland waterway system covered out there. We take a different approach than some associations where we're not fully in-house. We have 2 contract lobbyist firms. Our policy expert is Van Soyk and Associates. Many of you probably know the lead on this is Jeff Bowman, was the staff director of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee for about 5 years, but on that committee about for 20. Then Lincoln Policy Group, which is former Senator Lincoln, who was the first woman chair of the Agriculture Committee. So we have a very diverse collective group of members that we're really proud of. First, obviously, the operators that are pushing the barges. Then we have all different of the commodities that are actually shipping within the barge. Where we get a little funky, or as I say, sexy, which people would probably laugh about that, is we have a strong building trades presence, everyone from the carpenters to laborers, the AFL-CIO, where most of these locks that are currently being built are being built by our building trades, our skilled building trades. And then we have Nature Conservancy, Ducks Unlimited on the ecosystem side, where we support a program on the upper Mississippi River, where every dollar that goes for a lock and dam, dollar goes for ecosystem restoration. So, when you get an operator, a shipper, a building trade, and an ecosystem person walking all into the same office, usually throws elected officials off. But it's been an effective group it's been an effective group, and we got some successes that we can walk through. With this being 10 minutes, I had to shrink up the slide, so please ask any questions that you may have when we get into the Q&A. So first off, infrastructure package that was passed last year was a major win for the inland waterways. Prior to the infrastructure package being passed, there's about an $8 billion backlog of authorized infrastructure projects, and that's at authorized cost. You have some projects that were authorized in 2007 where you obviously know their cost has gone up, so it's probably quite more. Inland Waterways received about $2.5 billion for capital improvements, which would reduce this in simple math turn to about a $5.5 billion backlog. Sorry. If you look at the Corps of Engineers and the projects that were funded in the construction account, Inland Waterways were lucky enough to receive 2 of the 3 largest funding amounts. That's something that we are very proud of. Right after the infrastructure bill was passed, and on January 19th, when the funds were released, Congressman Sherry Bustos from Illinois and I did a Facebook Live event. She said something on that call that really stuck with me. Receiving funding for Lock and Dam 25 of Nest is the greatest accomplishment of her career, and she's been in Congress for 10 years. So that just really stuck with me about how this is a major win for the inland waterways. On the slide on the right, these are the projects that have been selected with the $2.5 billion. 2 in Arkansas / Oklahoma. Illinois received 2, Missouri received 1, Kentucky received 1, and then Pennsylvania received 2. So we still have about 113 million of that 200 or 2.5 billion that we can expend. Being from Northern California, I don't expect you to know where the actual locks are located. I put together this map. There is 1 new authorized lock located down in Texas on the Gulf and Coastal Waterway. Chickamauga or Kentucky lock right here in the middle was a lock that was funded to completion. Montgomery up here in Pittsburgh, Dash Hills as well. Lock and Dam 25. For I guess second lock outside of St. Louis is the easiest way to put that. Then 3 Rivers and M. Carnes right over here. Stas wanted me to hit on WRDA. So WRDA, they're going for their 5th time. It's a biennial bill. It's supposed to be authorized every 2 years. Water Resources Development Act is made to set the policy for the Corps of Engineers. There was only 2 done in 14 years. So the fact that Congress is back on the biennial schedule is extremely important. It authorizes, the deepening of coastal ports or new lock authorization or flood control chiefs reports, as long as setting policy. One thing in this word of bill that we will be advocating for, it was in the Senate bill, it was not in the House bill. It is adjusting the cost share for the construction of inland waterway projects. Currently, 65% comes from the general revenue, 35% comes from the inland waterways for new construction or major rehabilitation. Inland Waterways Trust Fund is a trust fund that is funded by 29-cent diesel fuel tax on the inland waterway operators, in which they advocated and were successful in raising the tax on themselves in 2014 with Congress, and raised that by 45%. So what the Senate did was recognizing there's inflation, recognizing that supply chain needing to get out in front of this, adding more money for construction of inland waterways. They adjust that cost to 75% out of the general revenue, 25% out of the Inland Waterway Trust Fund. What does this do? Over 10 years, it'll provide an additional $1.3 billion towards construction on inland waterways. So one, you can help control, with inflation and cost overruns and the labor shortage that's currently going on in America. You can help kind of, bat down those costs, but hopefully also move the construction timeline to the left, because every year that these locks are operational, there's a significant value to the nation for each year that they become operational. Our latest lock that became operational is $275 million a year value to the nation. So it's a significant amount of dollars. The House will probably take this bill WRDA up on the floor first week of June on suspension with no amendments, a ping pong conference. You're looking at potentially getting this Water Resources Development Act bill signed into law pre-August is where the committees are saying right now. That's probably going to happen in September, but if you looked at WRDA bills dating back to '86 when they were the first Water Resources Development Act, most WRDA bills were passed in even number of years and in September, and that's because it gives elected officials a win to go home and campaign all of October on. So I would not be surprised if we saw the WRDA bill passed in September. And with that, Stas, I think I'm pretty close to my time. Please like us on social media, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Tracy, thank you very much for that. I've got a couple of questions, but let me hold those till the end. Our next speaker is Steve Fisher, Executive Director, American Great Lakes Ports Association. Steve, good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Stas. Thank you. Can I confirm first that you can hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Then Todd, could we cue up the slides? Great. Thank you very much. And Todd, I'm kind of seeing about half the slides. Is there a, there we go. Great. Perfect. Thank you. Well, thanks again to the Propeller Club for inviting me to participate today. I appreciate being invited on this panel and having the opportunity to share a little bit about the Great Lakes Maritime System with everybody. As we explained earlier, I am Steve Fisher, Executive Director of the American Great Lakes Ports Association. Todd, next slide. We are an association of the public port authorities on the Great Lakes, which include most of the major ports on the Great Lakes in most of the major cities on the Great Lakes. We are primarily a public policy advocacy organization. We also, like Tracy, are based here in Washington, D.C., which reflects our focus on Congress and the federal government and working closely with federal agencies relevant to maritime and to ports. I invite everybody to visit our website, greatlakesports.org, and learn more about us. There's a lot of information on there about the Great Lakes, about Great Lakes shipping, and also about some of the policy issues that we advocate for here in Washington. Todd, next slide. Just real quick, Stas asked us to remind everybody a little bit about our region, a little bit about our shipping. Great Lakes Shipping is a binational partnership. The Great Lakes are half in the US, half in Canada. So we have to work closely with our Canadian colleagues to operate the maritime transportation system. The system supports over 237,000 jobs in the United States and Canada. About 150,000 of those jobs are just in the United States. And we move about 140 million tons of cargo a year. We're primarily a bulk transportation system, but some amount of break bulk, very little containerization, but just starting to nibble into that a little bit. A number of our ports are looking at new container shipping opportunities, but primarily a bulk and break bulk system. With a lot of focus on renewable energy, there's a lot of wind farms being built in the upper Midwest, and our ports have been very busy with wind energy components. So we have a lot of project cargo arriving on ships, mostly for these wind farms, big blades and tower components and so on. So our ports, just about all our ports are busy and are sort of jammed with windmill parts as those wind farms take shape. Our shipping system in general in the Great Lakes serves a number of sectors, energy, a lot of coal moving on the Great Lakes, wind, as I just mentioned. The steel industry is probably the biggest customer, which in turn feeds the regional auto industry, which is generally headquartered in the Great Lakes region. The majority of steel making in the United States takes place in the Great Lakes region, and raw materials for that steel making is moved on U.S. flag vessels regionally, domestically within the region to move raw materials from their source, from the mines and so on, to our steel mills, which are largely in the lower lakes in Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. And finally, the ag industry. The Great Lakes are an ag export route for a lot of commodities. The region, as you know, is sort of the breadbasket of the United States and Canada. And so there's a lot of ag products moving on the Great Lakes. Todd, next slide. I'd like to focus today, a little bit more regional awareness. Again, just for those who may not be that familiar with the geography, the navigation system on the Great Lakes is 2,300 miles long from the Atlantic Ocean on the east, stretching west into the middle of the heartland. You can go as far west as Duluth, Minnesota with a deep draft vessel on the Great Lakes. This is all enabled by some infrastructure. There are 16 deep draft navigation locks that a ship has to pass through to go from the Atlantic all the way to Duluth. They're sort of in three clusters. There's 7 locks on the St. Lawrence River between Montreal and Lake Ontario. 2 of those are in the United States and upstate New York. Those are owned and operated by the U.S. Department of Transportation. There are 5 additional locks in Canada, owned and operated by the Canadian government. The second cluster of locks are on the Welland Canal, which was built in the 1930s to connect Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. Those 8 locks enable ships to bypass Niagara Falls and allow deep draft navigation west through that area. And then finally, we have a group of locks up in northern Michigan in a town called Sault Ste. Marie, which are operated by the Army Corps of Engineers. We refer to these as the Sioux locks. Those are American locks exclusively. So from a US infrastructure perspective, we have to worry about those 2 locks in upstate New York and the locks in northern Michigan at the Sioux. And those are sort of our infrastructure burden, and the rest are our colleagues in Canada's infrastructure burden. So next slide. Looking at all this from a sort of horizontally as a cutaway, one of the things that's so impressive, I think, is that a ship essentially gets lifted 60 stories between Montreal and Lake Superior. So all these locks lift or lower ships a total of 600 feet. So that's quite a distance, and it's quite an engineering feat, quite frankly, to move ships that much horizontal distance as they move through the system. Next slide, please. The focus of my comments is going to be sort of the infrastructure needs of the Great Lakes navigation system. I would divide these up into 5 areas. First, harbor maintenance funding. So this is the Corps of Engineers program for maintaining deep draft navigation on the coasts and on the Great Lakes. As many of you know, that system is funded through the Harbor Maintenance Tax and the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. And the WRDA 2020 legislation really was a revolutionary bill that ensured that that trust fund and its revenues and its resources are fully spent. WRDA 2020 included some special budgetary treatment for expenditures from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund to try to spend out the $10 billion surplus balance that is sitting in that trust fund to use to dredge and maintain our nation's harbors. And so we were very excited about that legislation. The second provision in that legislation that's particularly interesting to the Great Lakes is something that our legislators fought for, which includes a requirement that as those trust fund dollars flow out, that no less than 13% of those go into the Great Lakes every year. So that provision kicks in on October 1st of this year. And so going forward after October 1st, we're going to see 13% of all harbor maintenance spending going into the Great Lakes by law. Just to give you a sense of what we're going to spend all that money on, we have about a $930 million backlog of harbor maintenance in the Great Lakes. 405 million of that is just dredging that needs to be done, that's backlogged throughout the harbors on the Great Lakes. There are a lot of navigation structures in the Great Lakes, such as jetties and breakwaters. There's about 300 million of that work that needs to be done. And then the Soo locks, they require about $225 million of maintenance work. So these are the existing locks in northern Michigan. Next slide, please. To give you a sense of how we've been doing over recent years in lobbying for increased harbor maintenance funding, of course, we work most logically with our colleagues from coastal ports to try to work as a group to try to urge Congress to increase expenditures from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. Our attitude is that if the pie grows, the slice of the pie that goes into the Great Lakes grows. So it makes most sense to work with our colleagues from coastal ports and AAPA to lobby for more funds. And I think as a group, we've all been very successful. You can see in FY13 at the bottom, nationwide, we were only getting 882 million for dredging of the nation's ports. And now this most recent appropriation bill gave us over 2.05 billion, a considerable increase in funding for the nation's ports and their dredging needs. And I've shown in the third column there how much the Great Lakes are getting. And you can see it's been growing as the national pie has been growing. So the logic makes sense, and we are going to continue to work with our colleagues, other coastal ports, other Great Lakes ports, to try to ensure that Congress keeps the funding flowing to catch up on the nationwide backlog of dredging. Next slide, please. Second focus area as far as infrastructure for us is building a brand new lock in northern Michigan at the Soo. And the photo shows that currently there are 4 locks up there. It's on the St. Mary's River, which connects Lake Superior and Lake Huron. The 2 locks on the left of that photo are active. The 2 locks on the right have been retired by the Army Corps of Engineers. The plan is to rip out those 2 on the right and replace them with a brand new single lock that is a large lock capable of accommodating the largest vessels on the Great Lakes. Those vessels are typically over 1,000 feet long, and so it needs to be a fairly large lock. The plan is to build a 1,200-foot lock in that footprint. The project is a $1.38 billion price tag. It has been funded. I'm pleased to say that was accomplished with the infrastructure bill. Prior to last year, Congress had appropriated $411 million for the project. The president included an additional $480 million in the fiscal year 22 appropriation bill, so that was great. And then the whole thing was finished off by an additional slug of $479 million that was in the infrastructure bill. So the project's funded, it is already under construction. And so we're hoping that in 5 or 6 years, we're going to be looking at a brand new completed lock up there in northern Michigan. Next slide, please. The third infrastructure priority for us is ice breaking. The Great Lakes actually close for a couple of months, closed to navigation during the winter from January 15th to March 15th. The Great Lakes are freshwater, not saltwater, and so they freeze much more easily and much more thick than any coastal ports do. And consequently, it's very difficult to navigate during the winter months. The locks also require maintenance at some point during the year, so that's typically done during late January, February, and early March. Consequently, we have these shoulder seasons just before the locks close and just before the system shuts down. So in December, late November, December, and early January, we have a lot of ice in the northern areas of the Great Lakes, and there's a need to keep those waterways open. late March, early April, we also have heavy ice, and there's a need to keep those waterways open. That is done by the United States Coast Guard, who operates a fleet of icebreakers on the Great Lakes. Unfortunately, we've seen an atrophy in the size of that fleet. In the late 70s, we had 14 Coast Guard icebreakers operating on the Great Lakes, and today we only have 9. The icebreakers that the Coast Guard maintains are of different sizes. The one that appears in the photograph is the largest icebreaker the Coast Guard operates. It's called the Mackinac. It's a very heavy icebreaker. Our industry is of the view that we need a new ship, an additional icebreaker of that size. Congress has authorized the construction of a $350 million new icebreaker for the Great Lakes, and we've been working with Congress to try to get that project funded. The parallel and sort of partner aspect of this initiative is to put in place something called the Great Lakes Winter Commerce Act. That is legislation that would establish performance metrics for the U.S. Coast Guard to meet as it undergoes its icebreaking mission. Right now, the Coast Guard kind of does the best it can with the assets it has. That's a little too loosey-goosey for us, in our opinion. And what we believe should be in place is performance metrics set by Congress that the Coast Guard then budgets and provides assets and resources and manpower to meet. And so it's approaching it a whole different way. We believe this is the only way to approach it because at the end of the day, the customers of the shipping system, the steel industry, the ag industry, the energy, the power plants and others that rely on coal deliveries and so on, they need these waterways to remain open and accessible and reliable. And so Coast Guard icebreaking is critical. Next slide, please. The fourth area of focus is something I think ports all over the United States are focused on, and that is MARAD's Port Infrastructure Development Program. This is a brand new program, first provided funding to ports in 2019. I'm embarrassed to say that the ports of the United States did not have a port-focused grant program prior to this. It's daunting now that I think about it, that we didn't demand something like this decades ago, but we didn't. And so fortunately in 2019, Congress stood up a new grant program just for port infrastructure. The importance of this program is we don't have to compete with highways or transit systems or airports or railroads or any other mode of transportation, which is the case with some of the other grant programs. This grant program is just for ports. So ports that apply for grants for their infrastructure improvements are only competing with other ports. This program was almost tripled in size in the infrastructure bill, which is wonderful. It requires a lot of resources. My understanding is MARAD is getting about $1 billion a year in grant applications, and Congress was funding the program at less than $300 million a year. So the infrastructure bill increased funding for the program, at least for the next 5 years, up to over $680 million a year. So that should do a lot more to take care of the nation's ports and their infrastructure investment needs. Grants for the FY22 round were due on Monday of this week. So I know we had a lot of Great Lakes ports submit grant applications. I'm sure that was the case for coastal ports, and we will see another successful round of funding provided by the federal government for our nation's ports. And then the next slide, please. Oh, there, I just wanted to provide for you a little idea of where some of the Great Lakes funding has gone over the last 3 years. We've gotten a little more than $90 million for a number of projects across the region. Some of these were basic infrastructure that simply renewed dock walls and things like that. But a few of them were for brand new facilities to enable these ports to get into new areas of business. I'll point to the Milwaukee project on that list, which is going to build a new grain export facility, enabling the Port of Milwaukee to considerably expand their grain exports. So these grants are useful not only as far as maintaining existing infrastructure to maintain existing business, but to also allow ports to expand their business and create jobs. And next slide, please. Finally, the fifth area of focus for us as far as infrastructure is coastal resiliency. I know this is an issue for coastal ports all over the United States. We have the same resiliency problems in the Great Lakes that are experienced elsewhere. Bad winter storms, big waves smashing up coastal infrastructure. In 2 years ago, the Port of Milwaukee was completely flooded by a large storm, a combination of high lake levels and a large storm. Back in 2017, we had a small port on Lake Ontario, the Port of Oswego, New York, completely smashed up by a bad winter storm, literally smashed the breakwater structure, which had been there for decades, smashed it to bits. And then giant waves passed through the breakwater, the hole in the breakwater, and then smashed up the dock walls and even destroyed or damaged, badly damaged some dock adjacent warehouses. So coastal resiliency is certainly a problem in our region. And I'm pleased to note that the Army Corps of Engineers last year began a comprehensive region-wide coastal resiliency study, which will literally look at the entire shoreline of the Great Lakes on the US side and make recommendations for new infrastructure projects, sort of for future WRDAs, to make improvements to shoreside infrastructure, to make sure we can harden that infrastructure and make sure it's resilient in the future. I think that's it. Todd, last slide. Yep, that's it. I'd be happy to answer questions, Stas, at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was very interesting, very comprehensive, and it's prompted a couple of questions from me, which we will get to at the conclusion of our last speaker. Paul Matthews, Executive Director, Port of South Louisiana. He has just taken over, I believe, in January. Paul, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, I took over in January. I know where all the bathrooms are now, so I think I'm okay. I think I'm safe. Rule number one is always do no harm, right? So as long as I have that information, I think I'm good moving forward. So it's great to be with you again, and everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. I come by way from two other ports on the Lower Mississippi River. First, the Port of New Orleans, where I began my career. And just recently, I was serving as the Deputy Port Director at the Port of Plaquemines, which is just further downriver from New Orleans, which represents the first 80 miles of the Mississippi River. Port of New Orleans is around mile marker 90, 95. Now, if you ask folks from Minnesota, they will say the first 80 miles of the Mississippi River are up in Minnesota, not down in Louisiana. So that's an interesting tidbit. So, infrastructure issues, obviously we're all focused on, and we're so grateful for Congress and President Biden and for signing the Infrastructure Act. And we all recognize, and I won't belabor the point, we all recognize the need for infrastructure. Our port is significant in that if you look at the Lower Mississippi River and go to the next slide, look at this map. My old boss, Gary Margronis, used to say a picture's worth 1,000 words. And it really is, because our port and the 4 other ports on the Lower Mississippi River are connected to 33 states and 2 Canadian provinces. As a matter of fact, if you take the 5 ports on the Lower Mississippi River from Baton Rouge all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, we are a top 5 largest port complex in the world by tonnage, just behind Zhengzhou, Rotterdam, Shanghai as well. And so connecting to the inland water market and its tributaries, you see the population that we connect to. And what we say to people is that we fuel and we feed the world, because what you'll see on the next slide is that we move more than 200 million plus tons. And most of that is really on the grain side, 43% on the grain side, and a good bit with petrochemical products. And so we are the #1 exporter of grain in the U.S., and which is very particular in that if we look at this Ukraine-Russian conflict, and we all know that between Russia and Ukraine are 2 of the top 6 producers and exporter of corn, and also a major exporter of wheat. And so when you see on this slide here, ADM, Zeno, Bunge, and Cargill all within our jurisdiction, we are working directly with those CEOs to look at expanding the facilities within the region. And the infrastructure grants that are able for us to get potentially through the application process will help us and help those companies expand, because there is a significant demand that they're feeling. They're feeling the pinch of the demand of corn and wheat to be exported, particularly in Europe, North Africa, and China, because China was #1 and #2 trade partners with Ukraine and Russia. So we're feeling the pinch, even though we are 5,900 miles away from this conflict. And so actually my second week on the job, I met with a CEO of each of these companies, which was supposed to be a meet and greet. The meet and greet turned into these 2 to 3 hour long sessions of how we can work together and how we can move forward. And I can tell you right now, what they were interested in the most was on dock rail. It was significant. They needed the on dock rail and loop tracks so they can have the capacity to be able to move this cargo. Not only that, but also the docks. In particular, Zeno actually has the largest grain terminal in the world by throughput right here on the mighty Mississippi River at the Port of South Louisiana, in the world. And that's part of our telling our story. But it's not just grain, it's also petrochemical products. As you see, we have the 3 oil refineries and the crude storage facilities with all the top players in the game when it comes to oil and gas. And we know oil and gas is not going away, but we also recognize, and they recognize, that there's an energy transition, and we're working with these companies as best as we can to make sure that we're facilitating economic development through waterborne commerce. We are a port that is not interested in being on the sidelines, but actually working with our customers, working with our tenants and operators within the jurisdiction to expand and to retain and develop more for job creation and for exports in our area. But it's going to take infrastructure needs, and that is, as my old boss used to say, the long pole in the tent. That's what we need first to get it done. So we're really excited about the Infrastructure Act. But along with that, the Army Corps of Engineers, along with the state in partnership as the state sponsor, have deepened the Mississippi River, lower Mississippi River, to 50 feet, all the way up to the Baton Rouge area. That is significant not only for us, but for Plaquemines and New Orleans and Baton Rouge to move more break bulk, and containerized cargo. We know that for every 1 foot of depth that we're able to deliver, we're able to get over $10 million more to $20 million more in value of cargo coming into the port. That is significant. And when we're talking about feeding the world and fueling the world, at this time, we have to make sure the infrastructure is there. And we also know that with this crisis in Ukraine and Russia, as this conflict continues, when those trade routes change, it's very difficult for them to go back to where they once were. So this is an opportunity for our country, for our port, to make sure that America's farmers are in the right position to move cargo to the rest of the world, far more than they've ever done before. Next slide, please. So this is again just showing our commodity breakdowns for crude oil, petrochem products, and on the grain side. We have 3,100 vessels that we've called back and forth, so that's over 6,000 vessel traverses. And we have a significant amount of barge movers that are coming from Mid-America, from Memphis, St. Louis area, even Kansas City, and a great deal of cargo from the barge side that we very much appreciate. We are a barge port. We are one of those, we kind of say blue collar ports because we don't have crews that's constantly working on the river to move this cargo. Next slide. So our top trade partners, guys, it's really simple. We're exporting grain, and then we're importing a lot of phosphorus and ores. For example, if you look at Jamaica, you say, what in the world are you importing from Jamaica? We're importing a product called bauxite, which is used to make aluminate, which is then used to make aluminum. And then you guys pick up that product when you buy Coke cans at the store for your barbecues, right? So we're all over the place, feeding China, feeding Japan, but also feeding South America and Central America. And then from there, bringing those goods back from Central and South America for industrial development. Next slide. So this has been our 3 pillars. Obviously, transportation infrastructure is the key right now because our exporters are just chomping at the bit. And with a lot of these funds coming out of the federal government, many of them are competitive grants. So as I said before, we continue to get interest by these operators to work with us for expansion and development on the infrastructure side. We're actually going to look at applying for a grant soon, particularly to expand our rail, as we have 3 Class 1s on the west bank of the river. We have Union Pacific, east bank of the river. We have KCS and CN. To get the on-dock rail, we're just a few yards away, and that investment by the port with matches from private agencies will be a game changer at our port. Agriculture is big for us, as I've already said. We're looking at our market share from the agriculture side. We want to maintain what we have and obviously grow from there. And in particular, the energy transition, with much of the oil and gas facilities at our port, many of them are transitioning to biodiesel, looking at hydrogen hubs, e-methanol. So not only are we applying for grants, but we're finding ways to partner with those companies to move forward on the energy transition. Next slide. So these are just some recent projects that we've had at our port, and you see the numbers: 45.8 million. And these we see as some of the smaller projects that we're looking to work on. There's a couple other projects that we see right now that could be up to $500 million. And so the need to put a focus, as Mayor Red is doing, thank God, to put a focus on our ports. I think this country is in a position now, based on the fact that supply chain and logistics are now household names, that our ports and port associations have to take advantage of this opportunity to explain to Congress, the legislators, the American people, that $15 to $20 million, even in one port, is a drop in the bucket for what we really need to be as efficient as possible for our ports. So I've had some other infrastructure numbers on the next slide, but I just wanted to give you an example of the dollars that we're dealing with on regional projects that may not be a port project, but they benefit the port, so we're supporting it, and port projects themselves. And this is just a drop in the bucket of what our ports need on the Lower Mississippi River and the rest of the country to compete with the rest of the world. Thank you, Stas.
Okay, so guys, let me start with one question for Steve and Paul about on-dock rail. Steve, do you have, is on-dock rail showing up with your port members?
As an issue, or what do you mean?
As an issue and as a priority?
Not so much, Stas. It's pretty common at Great Lakes ports, but I have not heard it raised as a problem issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Paul, what is the price tag for getting your terminals funded for on-dock rail?
I'm sorry, say again?
What is your estimated cost for getting on-dock rail at your terminals?
Well, for the amount that we want to get done, we're looking between about 50 to 75 to get some of the on-dock rail that we need.
Okay. And over what time period?
Really, based on the demand, we really need to get moving so we can get it within the next 18 to 24 months.
Okay.
And that's kind of a rush process in many ways, but I'll try to be very aggressive.
Okay. And in terms of agricultural exports for both of you, how are you trending in 2022?
And Stas, how are we what in 2020?
Yeah, how are you? Somebody is not muted. Todd, can you see if?
Oh, it's coming from Steven.
Okay. All right. My question is, compared to 2021, could you give us a comparison of how agricultural exports are comparing in 2022? Paul?
Yeah, I can take that. So we look at the first quarter of this year So let me just say this, on the export side, we moved about 48 million on the export side. We anticipate as of right now, based on our first quarter numbers, which are pretty strong, actually increasing that number by almost 20% in exports.
Very good.
So we hope that second, third, and fourth quarter don't lag behind, and we have some consistency.
Steve?
Sure. Yet to be determined is the answer. I think there's a lot of anticipation that with the war in Ukraine, that Russian and Ukrainian ag products will sort of be absent from the world market, and that there'll be greater demand for North American products. And so our suppliers and our ports are excited about that. Most of our grain export stuff out of the lakes happen in the later in the year. They tend to be in the fall and in the sort of September through November period. So we'll see then, but I have to caveat that with the weather plays a big role in whether or not grain flows out of the Great Lakes. If there's a bad or too wet a summer, it wrecks the harvest in the upper Midwest and in the Canadian Midwest. So it'll depend on weather this summer, and then it'll depend on what the market conditions are in the fall.
And then Stas, on the overall condition of exports on the inland waterway system, it's tracking, as Paul said, very similar to where it was last year. But where you've seen the immediate increase from the Ukraine-Russian wars out of the Pacific Northwest right now, the Columbia Snake system has seen an increase in tonnage. All of our boats on the upper part of the river that are making its way to Paul, like Bungie and ADM, are having a very active last 2 weeks. So they should be showing up here in Paul's port, and his numbers on the last couple quarters here should be pretty active. Just looking at your average month fuel tax burn on the inland waterway system, we're already tracking where we were on a record level last year, and we're expected, both are booked out well in advance on the upper. So Paul should be a happy man this year.
Okay, for Tracy and Steve, you talked about backlogs of spending or investment. Tracy, how much of a backlog of, if you look at the whole system, how much money do we still need to get our locks and dams up to where they should have been? I don't want to say how many years ago, but
1920s.
Thank you.
That's honest. So the average age of a lock is well north of 50 years. 70% of our locks and dams are over the age of 50 years, which is a problem because they're designed to last 50 years. Every year after 50 years, the risk of failure goes up, which means you're spending more money on maintenance. But also, a major problem is they're not modernized to today's tow size. So the efficiencies that you could get from going to a 1,200-foot chamber, such as Steve said on the Sioux lock, is what we're looking to get on the upper miss. We're only starting at lock and dam 25, and you still have 24 more to go on the upper miss until they're modernized. Just authorized projects without cost increase, you're at 5.5 billion. But if you don't think there's cost increase with inflation and labor from a project that was authorized in 2007, you're probably not there. That's just authorized. Putting an overall number of every lock on the system, we don't have that from the Corps of Engineers, and they've been reluctant to give us that full number.
So the reason, so the Chickamauga situation comes to mind. How long did it take from the time that it was authorized till the time it was completed?
Yeah, you got Olmsted was almost 30 years. You're looking at Kentucky Lock's going to be about 27 years. Then you're going to get Chick Lock, which in this president's budget funded it to completion. If Propes ever gets their act together and actually passes a bill, you'll see that funded to completion. But you're looking at, well north of 25 years, which is a problem. If you look at, during the 20s and 30s and the New Deal time frame, locks were being constructed in the 3 to 6 years, and now we're averaging north of 20 with modern technology. So What we're using this infrastructure package as a case study. There's 2 locks funded from start to finish completion. Montgomery Lock up in Pittsburgh, Lock and Dam 25 just outside of St. Louis. Is, what are the benefits of giving it full funding up front? Do you see a reduce in overall time frame? Can you construct it in 3 to 6 years? And can you have a cost savings? So, that's going to be our case studies as this move forward, as speaking with the Corps, those locks that were funded to completion, potentially, they're saying 6 to 9 years, which, seems like a long time, but after 25 plus years, we'll gladly take 6 to 9 years.
So do you think that that's realistic?
I do. I think it's there. That's working with our building trades. Also, taking the fact where we are with the labor problem. But these are skilled building trade positions that pay well, that hopefully don't have a labor problem. But, it's hard to tell because if you look at where these locks are located, especially with the amount of infrastructure dollars that are out there, you're going to have projects in and around major cities where these locks are located, hundreds of miles outside of the major cities. So how are you going to get people to the lock is our biggest question right now.
Okay, I want you to hold that thought because John Hark and I have a where's the workers coming from question for you in a second. Steve, what's your backlog and what's your workforce situation like?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question right now. So we're in the middle of building a lock right now. It's, as I mentioned, at the Sioux in northern Michigan. The other 2 locks on the Great Lakes that are American locks, in other words, they're our problem rather than Canada's problem, are in upstate New York. Those 2 are owned by the U.S. Department of Transportation rather than the Corps. And I'm pleased to say that over the last probably 12, 14 years, DOT has had a ongoing program of rehabilitating those locks. So they've spent about $150 million already rehabilitating those 2 locks in upstate New York. So that's happened bit by bit. It wasn't done all at once, but it's been sort of a responsible ongoing maintenance program. And they've really refreshed those. They were built in the 50s, so they brought them forward and they've modernized them. They have the latest technology, and any engineering flaws have been addressed. The locks in northern Michigan at Sault Ste. Marie, the 2 existing locks have considerable maintenance needs. There are all kinds of deteriorated steel and concrete and so on that needs to be addressed. The Corps has been trying to do that. It's been doing a lot of work and spending a lot of money, but they still have over 200 million to go. And then right next to those 2 existing locks, we're building a brand new lock for 1.4 billion. So a lot of work being done to sort of try to renew this infrastructure. I can tell you on the Canadian side, they've spent over $600 million over the last 10 years rehabilitating their locks on the Great Lakes. So everyone realizes it's a bunch of concrete and steel, and it's not going to be there if we don't maintain it. So there's been a lot of efforts underway to try to make those investments. But as you point out, Stas, it's slow. The Sioux Lock project, the new lock, was authorized in 1986. So it just started construction 2 years ago. That's a 35-year stretch to get that lock going. As Tracy said, these things take a long time, and that's unfortunate. I wish we had a better system here in the United States. I think this whole infrastructure discussion has to be have an overlay of the current workforce challenges we are having in this country and the current supply chain and inflationary challenges we're having in this country. Whether it is building a brand new lock or rehabilitating a lock or doing port infrastructure or what have you, on dock rail, rebuilding dock walls, you name it, everything's going up in price. And I don't know that we have the workers to even do it in the first place. A number of our ports are reporting to me that the contracting firms that they work with locally are telling them that they don't have the manpower to spend out these infrastructure projects that we are all hoping to snag the money for. So that's going to be a challenge. And that some of the bids, they don't know how to bid them even, because you put a bid in for a certain price And by the time you get the award and you get your people out there to do the work, it's 9 months later. And in fact, actual prices have gone up considerably. We've heard the contractors telling us that steel supply companies will not even give them a price. They'll give them a price the day they ask for the price to do the bid, but 9 months later, the price is something completely different. And so a lot of construction firms are getting caught in the middle between what they bid and what the actual costs are once they get out there to do the work. This is causing a problem, and not to mention the workforce problem as far as the construction workers. I'm not sure what the answers are. I know a lot of the construction companies are out trying to work with state workforce development agencies and others to try to find the workers. I don't know what the solution is, though. We've got a challenge on our hands with both supply chain, steel, cement, other needed supplies, and then also workforce, and then just the cost escalations. Sorry to be so gloomy.
No. I'm very interested in this, and I think the Propeller Club needs to be more active on this front on a national basis, because there's a real question. John Hark and I were talking yesterday about the number of engineers, that we're not getting the number of engineers that we need. And the question of STEM education comes up. And then there's a welder shortage. We hear about the welder shortage. Tracy, are you hearing the same thing for your lock and dam work?
As far as worker shortage?
Yeah.
So yes and no. So the smaller projects, your less than $100 million bid contracts, those contractors are having a hard time as far as finding work. Your larger projects that are, up to $1 billion, it seems like they're having an easier time finding work because, people are knowing that they're going to get there. They're going to work on a project for 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Most people have a career, start on one lock and retire on one lock. So we have not had that yet. Where our bigger shortage is coming in is working with the Corps of Engineers. They're going through right now kind of a generational change where a lot of the institutional knowledge is retiring, and you're having, your millennial generation, as people like to say, getting up into these senior roles where they didn't have before and having to, get up to speed quickly. The other labor shortage where inland waterways is having a hard time right now is deckhands. It's hard to get people to get on a boat, 30 days on a boat, 30 days off a boat. If you had told me that at 18, I don't think I would be in this position right now, but half the year on vacation. But right now we're struggling on the deckhand side. So any boat that's tied up, it's because of the labor shortage.
That is an issue that we are very concerned with. And we are, Nick Marrone, are you out there for a second? Nick?
Yes.
Nick is with the Seafarers International. He's going to be talking at our next panel, but we're talking about a shortage of deckhands on towboats. Nick, you've been talking about this problem for some time, and how have the Seafarers been addressing the shortfall?
Well, we have a training program in which we bring in brand new people, around 15 to 20 every month, through our training program that runs about 20 weeks. And then they are ready to go to sea. Hopefully, some of them stay. Unfortunately, it's not a career-minded profession. We see the younger generation do this for the excitement of travel and the money. It also helps mature them and gives them a clearer picture of maybe what they really want to do for long-term in life. And I'd say we probably retain around 30% of what we invest in to get them into this as a career.
All right. Thank you, Nick. We'll be talking about this more at our next session. I also want to talk about the icebreaker situation. And I'm really depressed to hear what you're telling us, Steve, about the shortfall in icebreakers and the fact that we have gotten behind the 8 ball on that. And of course, from a national security standpoint, we know that the Russians are busy up in the North Pole scouting out and building sea lane areas. And the Coast Guard obviously is aware of this. And I know that Joel, from his days at the Coast Guard's followed this. Do we need to be much more on top of the icebreaker building situation? And we can't go to the Chinese and the Russians for this, so it has to be built in the United States, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I can only speak about the Great Lakes icebreaker as opposed to the polar, but I know the Coast Guard wants a new polar icebreaker. We've kicked around with them whether the 2 vessels, the Great Lakes icebreaker and the polar, can't be somehow similarly designed to make some cost efficiencies. Building one-off ships is very expensive. So if you build a number of vessels of the same design, it's cheaper. But it is a concern. Look, our country has got to decide to make these investments, and we're investing in all kinds of things. I'm a little dismayed that this infrastructure bill didn't have a little more robust focus on icebreaking.
How about shipbuilding?
That too. There were definitely some things left out. Now it's hard to complain because there was a lot of money provided for other stuff. So we're grateful, but there were definitely some things left out.
Okay, now I see Admiral Joel showed up there. Admiral, would you like to say something?
Yeah, first, excuse my appearance. I'm about to get on a flight to go from Washington back to New Orleans, so I've changed. But with respect to the polar icebreakers, our Propeller Club and Navy League just a few weeks ago heard from the project manager of the Polar Icebreaker program from VT Halter Shipyard in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And the Coast Guard has been funded construction money for 3 polar icebreakers. The first one is in construction in Pascagoula, and the others will be following. Steve's comments earlier about, the United States has to get serious about this are absolutely correct. We have only 1 operational polar icebreaker now. We have actually 2, but the second one is inoperative and it's been cannibalized for parts to keep the first one running. The Russians, they have between 35 and 50 icebreakers, not all new, not all great, but they have much more icebreaking capability than we do. And as we start using that Arctic route more and more with the ice melting, it's going to be more and more critical.
Joel, I think that this is an issue we need to come back to because it is going to come, it's one of many areas of neglect over the last 40 years that we have to deal with. And you heard our discussion on Monday about shipbuilding and our reliance on foreign flag carriers. We can't go out to the Russians and ask them to cut us a hole up through the Arctic, right?
Not going to happen.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, yes, Steve.
Stas, I have a little analogy I always throw out with people, and maybe everyone will laugh at this, but any major airport that's in the north part of this country has a fleet of snowplows somewhere on their property that they have invested in for the handful of days during the year when there's a heavy snow and they got to keep the runways open. Those runways are commerce, and they've invested tens of millions of dollars in snowplows that they probably use, for 10 days a year, maybe, to keep that commerce flowing. And I see icebreakers as the same thing. If we are going to have waterways that are trade lanes remain reliably open, whether we're talking about in the polar area, whether we're talking about in the Great Lakes or wherever, we have got to invest in these icebreakers. They may not be used all the time. In fact, and this is what some of the bean counters tell us, they're expensive and they end up sitting idle a lot of the year. Well, it's the same with the snowplows. They sit idle most of the year, but when we need them, we need them. And it is the reliability of our waterborne transportation system that is the issue.
Very good. Okay, one last question to, Paul's gone, but I'll ask it to both you, Steve and Tracy. Steve, you referenced resiliency and the need for us to start re-engineering our port facilities to handle worse weather. And Tracy, obviously, the 2019 flood had an adverse impact. And Amy is here as well. Let me start, Tracy. Are we redesigning or having our designs for locks and dams accommodate worsening flood and climate change conditions?
Yeah, I think when you go through the modernization of the chief's reports, that's definitely going to play an impact on these new studies as they're authorized, the new projects that are built. The dams that were built back in the 1920s, obviously, those are going to have to get reworked. But as you see the new ones, there will be a resiliency aspect to each lock and dam.
Okay. Amy, are you there? Could you maybe speak for just a second about flooding and resiliency challenges at your member ports?
Yeah, first I want to thank Tracy and his entire team over at WCI for their advocacy and upgrading, the infrastructure on the inland waterways. So IRPT's members are the port side facilities that use the river system that he's so, proudly advocating for. So we thank him and his team. I just wanted to make that little bit of a distinction there. The great thing about our members that work on the water is that we've been dealing with fluctuations of the river levels for as long as they've been around. So, climate change higher than normal water flows is something that we've become accustomed to dealing with and operating in. There are certain, disasters, natural disasters that come through that, yes, we have to, work around, and maybe the rise or the increase in frequency of those disasters may be occurring, but because of the recent funding dedicated for resilience, our members are taking advantage of that and learning from experiences in the past. I do want to just comment on the workforce and labor issues that were brought up.
Sure.
Our association has been hearing from our members that, workforce and the ability to attract and recruit labor has become an issue for some of them. So we've designed an interactive web page for open career opportunities. We currently have over 1,000 current openings on our website at irpt.net. We've been going to different career fairs, maritime colleges, technical schools, and general public career fairs to help spread the word of these really great paying jobs. So when our members come out and say this is an issue, we really take heed and get out there and spread the message. And then I also want to just bring forth, because you have so many, shippers and shipper agents on the Zoom today, is that IRPT is currently working on some modeling for container on barge. And I know that container on barge has been talked about so much in the past. The amount of inquiries that our association has been getting directly from the shippers is really outstanding. It may be because of the supply chain issues. And again, maybe there's a silver lining to this, right? In that because of the supply chain issues, other shippers are looking for alternative solutions. And one of those alternatives are container on barge. So we're actively looking at modeling. So if a shipper has, just for an example, reached out to, the Louisville River Port, one shipper reaching out to one port maybe didn't work, but when we have and can combine and collaborate 6 shippers with 6 ports, now we're effective, and now we can look at true modeling to benefit 6 ports, 6 shippers, and the resilience of the supply chain.
Amy, I'm absolutely in agreement with you. And as you know, our good friend Marty Shell has been trying to address those issues up at Fort Smith. And
Yes, sir.
And I'm very glad to hear that you guys are focused on that. And if there is any information on workforce or on container on barge that you would like to share with me, I will be glad to distribute that. And that information is very helpful, and I appreciate it. I want to ask Steve one last question here. You started your, you were talking about resilience and the need to upgrade. And do you think that the lock and dam systems are anticipating the greater climate change challenges?
Yes, in the Great Lakes, the locks in the Great Lakes are all on canals or water or river systems that are controlled by nearby dams. So that doesn't appear to be where the problem is. It's where the shorelines have sort of open water, if you will, and that's where the energy picks up from a storm or from. It's not in the constrained areas along rivers in the Great Lakes. It's where a port might be exposed out on the open lake. That's true in Chicago and Milwaukee and Cleveland and other locations. But a storm coming across the lake can not only shove the entire lake toward the shore from the winds, and that raises water levels on that shoreline, but it also then the storm itself creates very heavy waves, and the combination is what the problem is.
Very good. Okay, everybody, I am sorry to say that this is concluding a very interesting panel where we've heard a lot about the challenges on the Great Lakes and inland waterways. I want to thank Tracy Z. Tracy, thank you very much. Steve Fisher, thank you very much. Paul Matthews is gone. Amy, thank you very much for your input there. Appreciate that. We are going to take a 2-minute break for everybody to get reorganized. We have our Jones Act speakers coming on, and we welcome them. So we will hold for 2 minutes while everybody gets situated. And that is Torey Presti, Nick Marrone, Ed Washburn, and Ann McIntyre. Thanks to our Great Lakes and Inland Waterways participants and speakers, and any information that you all think that we should have, please forward that to me and I will distribute that. And obviously, Joel and I are very interested in the icebreaking situation. And of course, Steve, you've got a few shipyards up there, and maybe they should be doing a little bit more of that kind of work too. Okay, thank you very much. And so we'll hold for 2 minutes, and we'll be back at 10:35 Pacific. Thank you very much, guys, for your participation. Okay, it is 10:35 Pacific, and we are back on with our second Maritime Day panel, Jones Act Carrier Reports. Let me just say that on Monday, the 16th, there was a great deal of discussion about our dependency on foreign flag carriers, and some suggestions, as you may have heard at the top of the presentation, about the need for new US-built ships. Bo Breistrup from Denmark did a short summary in which he referenced the possibility of 2,500 TEU vessels working from the West Coast to Asia. As some of you know, the Port of Oakland, for example, has lost a number of sailings, and that is reducing the ability of agricultural exporters to get to market. They're having to truck some of their stuff down to LA and Long Beach. It's costing them $3,000 to get there. And Paul Snell from British American suggested that maybe we should consider a coastal feeder service between Oakland and LA and Long Beach, which was such a radical idea. I don't know why anybody ever thought of such a radical thing. And on American flag vessels with American crews, oh God, you know, what is the country coming to when it thinks that it could actually support a US fleet with US built ships and US crews? So, you know, I was absolutely shocked and flabbergasted to hear this kind of subversive talk, but nevertheless, it's out there and being discussed. So, you know, after having been involved trying to support it for the last 20 years, I have to pinch myself to find out that there actually may be a few people thinking that this is a good idea. So I will stop ranting on that subject and introduce our panelists, starting with Torey Presti, President of National Shipping, based in San Francisco. Our own beloved Nicholas Marrone, Vice President, Seafarers International Union, and a board member of the Propeller Club of Northern California, which he sometimes forgets to mention. You know, hurts my feelings when you do that, Nick. But I'm coming to your Seafarers event in the fall, and I'm going to express my hurt feelings there. And next speaker is Ed Washburn, Senior Vice President, Fleet Operations for Pasha, Hawaii, who has been a speaker for us for the last 3 years. Ed, thank you very much for coming. And Ann McIntyre, Business Director, San Francisco Bar Pilots, who has been challenged by the fluctuating maritime situation, and herself and her team are going to need new vessels built in the United States by somebody other than the Easter Bunny. So on that note, Torey Presti, welcome to our Maritime Day presentations. And is there light at the end of the tunnel for the Jones Act carrier fleet?
My goodness. Well, I think, you know, actually thank you, Stas. It's actually a bright spot, I think, for the Jones Act, because now there's a clear differential between the global carriers and the Jones Act carriers. You know, after both ships hopefully float, the difference is that they diverge, or they go the opposite directions. We saw the rates this year or the last 2 years in the Trans-Pacific and other trade lanes quadruple. We've seen blank sailings. We've seen the supply chain broken in many areas, and we point our fingers to all of them. But there's many to blame in this case. But I think the Jones Act can proudly say that we kept a stable service to the contiguous and non-contiguous trades of the United States, price-wise. No blank sailing, schedule integrity. We were all up to about 98%, and I'm sure Ed can confirm that Hawaii and even Alaska is also maintained those services, and that's because the Jones Act carriers, the big guys especially, invested not only in expensive ships and not only in expensive and very skilled labor, but more so the terminals. And you're getting the terminals. If you look at the Matson model, they've entered the Trans-Pacific in the last 18 months, beefed it up, and their success has been able to get their throughput through the terminals and have their own chassis, that they're not reluctant, that they don't rely on chassis pulls. So there's a huge differentiation. I think the Jones Act has gotten a lot of appreciation. I can tell you from Puerto Rico, it has. I was at a dinner a couple months ago there, and one of the largest customers basically said, "I like the Jones Act," and I was flabbergasted. I mean, I almost fell over, and that was before we had our martinis. So it was a good evening, and I think people now appreciate that. The Jones Act should be also, in 1920, when it was basically came about, it was the birth of what we know today as the FMC and MARAD, and then they split moving down the path. So the Jones Act also preserves the rights of the exporters on the commerce side. And that was stated back in 1920. As you rightfully pointed out, where's the future? Now people are talking about a new invigorated American Marine Highway. The Maritime Administration, as you know, I think started the program. I was part of it back in 2007. It was way back when. And
Sean Connaughton.
No, it was even before Sean Connaughton. It was a little before Sean, although it was before Sean gave it a big push. But the guy that went to Houston, Captain, and I forgot his name.
Leeback.
Say it again.
Leeback?
No, it was somewhere in between 2004, Nick. Anyway, we'll look it up. Google it by the time the question and answers comes about. Anyway, the American Marine Highway has been traditionally, we have the largest, world's longest developed coastline, and it's a shame we're not using it. And getting specifically to the American Marine Highway, that grant program, which is typically $12 million a year, has been increased 3 times in the last 3 months with extended deadlines, and now it's up to 42 million. Okay, that's still a drop in the bucket, but it's a step in the right direction. And in the documents, the tender documents, they basically said, how can you alleviate the supply chain mess, or how can you help? And you're right, the Europeans know how to do short sea shipping. I've seen ships when they discharge from the mothership directly onto the feeder ship, and then she would sail. And we have a lot of, we've got at least 10 or 11 marine highways set up, West Coast M5. We do the M10. We do Houston down in Miami every other week. The M95 has some participants. Sean Connaughton's James River has been a success story, Norfolk to Richmond. But most of the success stories have been in the brown water, or the not the blue water. And that needs to change, and we hope to be part of that. This week, the AFL-CIO came out, and there was an article that they supported. And on that note, there's no better supporter than Mike Sacco of the SIU. And I don't care on which side, whether it's commercially, management, people in Washington, he has been the guy that has supported the Jones Act more than anybody I know. He hosts these programs, used to be once a year, as the SIU is part of the AFL-CIO. He would invite all of the different unions at that party and talk about maritime trade. And he would educate the Bakers Union or the coal miners what the Jones Act is and how it works and benefits. So the Jones Act has been long criticized. It's now 102 years into its old. It's still withstanding. It's so convoluted and twisted, I don't think anybody can undo it at this point, Stas. And if you look historically, the Navigation Acts, I think in the 1700s, lasted about 200 years. So we got another 98 years to go. Anyway, thanks for letting me chat, and happy Maritime Week.
Okay, Torey, thank you very much. Now, quick question. You're going to be looking for a new Jones Act ship, correct?
Oh, yes. Either we're one and done, or yes, yes, I am. Well, we are, and it's a good, I don't have to ask, you can ask Ed, he has firsthand knowledge of this. It's a 40-month, it's about a 36-month project from when you ink the thing. And that's because when we go back to what you had a very good gentleman on Monday that talked about the long lead time in building onesies, twosies ships versus building 50 or 60 like China, Korea, and Japan can do at a time. We just don't have it anymore. So yes, no, we are looking, and you have to build in America to be a Jones Act carrier.
Okay, we're going to come back to the shipbuilding issue in a little while. Torey, thank you very much for that. Nick Marrone, the Seafarers have been a champion of the Jones Act. We've heard the reference to Mr. Sacco. Where do you, with all of the national security challenges, are people at least beginning to think that maybe we need more US flagged ships, or we're going to ask the Russians to take our stuff to the next war?
Well, US flagships are always a great addition to our homeland, national, and economic security. I think the toughest parts about building new ships is where do they fit exactly for the best profitability, what trade lanes, what capacity is in those trade lanes. All these things have to be evaluated before you just go start building a ship. Doesn't make any sense to spend $250 million if you're not going to get cargo.
Of course.
So
go ahead.
I got my little statement here. You want me to get into that, or we just
absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. United States Merchant Marine is at a crossroads, and if we are to continue to meet the challenges of the 21st century and an unstable world, the federal government and the maritime industry must work together to find solutions to help keep our industry viable against the unlevel playing field that is world commerce and the opposition of misguided interest groups on both the left and right here at home. Our industry is well aware of the ongoing mariner shortage that the United States faces and the implication that shortage has for national security. This is the paramount issue facing the merchant marine today. And all of the issues that are of concern, such as improving regulations, providing greater economic opportunities, and increasing competitiveness, are important factors in helping the industry get back to where we need to be to continue our efforts to protect our American economic, homeland, and national security. The U.S. flag merchant fleet relies on three pillars to support and fulfill the mandates set forth in the Merchant Marine Act of 1936. The Jones Act, the Maritime Security Program, and cargo preference. All these laws working together create an environment necessary for a successful and commercial viable merchant marine. Trained mariners, jobs for those mariners, ships for those mariners to crew, and cargo to keep those ships moving. Whatever else we talk about today, keep those four things in mind, because everything we do in this industry and everything the government does to support the industry has to go towards supporting one of those four things: mariners, jobs, ships, cargo. A solid workable government policy on the merchant marine needs to fulfill the need of each of these things in order to be successful. Let's first talk about mariners and jobs. The mariner shortage that we currently face has two aspects to it. First, the recruitment of new mariners into the industry, and second, the continued training and retention of existing mariners. In order to get new mariners in the door, we need to be able to demonstrate to them that choosing a career in the maritime industry is a viable option for them. A life at sea isn't for everyone. It's long hours, it's time away from family, and dangerous work. In a modern day economy that seems to expect every worker to go to college and then work a 9-to-5 job, it's difficult for many young people to imagine a career in the merchant marine. We have found, however, that one of the easiest transition is the transition between a career in the military to a career in the maritime industry. While the merchant marine is not a uniform service, the relationship between the merchant marine and the uniformed services is clear, and the lifestyle is similar. The maritime industry has put together a military to maritime program that is designed to help identify military veterans who are looking for jobs and pair them with the jobs, training, and credentialing that they need in order to begin a career in the maritime industry and more easily transition to a civilian life. At the same time, Congress should work to help veterans while reducing the bureaucratic burdens. Here are a few ideas that can help us bring new ships and more cargo into the merchant marine. First, the 2008 Coast Guard Authorization Act gave the Maritime Administration the authority to enforce existing U.S. flag cargo preference laws, but the agency has been unable to set the necessary enforcement. Despite the clear intent of Congress, MARAD continues to find itself blocked in the interagency review process from publishing implementing regulations for this authority. Without these implementing regulations, MARAD has been unable to use the power granted by Congress to hold shipper agencies of the federal government accountable when they fail to comply with existing cargo preference requirements. Evidence supports a strong belief in certain areas of the industry that the commercial fleet is missing opportunities across all major sectors of cargo preference, whether it's defense-related cargo, Ex-Im Bank finance cargo, or PL 480 and other food aid cargoes, and that this missing cargo is contributing to the decline of the fleet. This is common sense, yet it remains an issue over a decade later. This must change. A key legislative option to consider and would have a positive impact on jobs and ships would be rolling back the cuts to the cargo preference that were enacted in 2013. The Maritime Administration has made it clear that the changes made to cargo preference in the Moving Ahead for Progress Act of 2013, which reduced the percentage of foreign food aid cargoes reserved from the merchant marine from 75% to 50%, were responsible for the loss of over 25 ships in the U.S. flag international fleet. Congress can reverse that change and restore the 75% requirement, or even expand the requirement to 100% to mirror the requirement for defense-related cargo. Doing so would ensure the additional cargo needed to sustain the ships and the jobs that existed just a few years ago, and help reverse the negative trend that we have seen since that misguided change in the law. On the Jones Act front, we continue to push for creative solutions to kickstart short sea shipping projects across the country. MARAD's Marine Highways program is a good start, but more must be done to help make short sea shipping more than just a paper program. As we see more and more people concerned about climate change, the more sense short sea shipping makes. Not only will it result in new jobs and new ships for the Jones Act domestic fleet, it will help reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by getting trucks off the highway, reduce the congestion in our ports, and moving those goods via ships or barges. A variety of tax-related issues have been discussed over the years to promote the maritime industry. Most recently, Congress adopted the tonnage tax, which brings the industry in line with the tax regimes of most of our foreign competitors. Congress should continue to look at ways to use the tax code to incentivize shipping cargo on American ships. Past ideas have included tax breaks for shippers to encourage them to utilize American shipping companies to move their cargo. These are just a few ideas that the industry has discussed over the years to help promote the industry. And while it is clear that there are no silver bullets that can solve every problem the industry faces today, there is one idea and one bill that comes close. The Energizing American Shipping Act is a comprehensive bill designed to address all four of the major concerns: mariners, jobs, ships, and cargo. This bipartisan bill, which was introduced in Congress by Congressman John Garamendi and Senator Roger Wicker, would reserve a small portion of exported American crude oil and liquefied natural gas for ships built in the United States, flagged American, and crewed by American mariners. The resulting cargo would be sufficient to create thousands of new shipbuilding and mariner jobs, while adding dozens, if not 100, new ships to the U.S. flag international fleet. With the lifting of the ban on export of crude oil in 2015, the United States has seen rapid growth in the oil export business, yet none of that cargo is carried on American flagships. The American industry and our allies in Congress must stop constantly playing defense, protecting the ships and jobs we have. We need to go on the offense and start trying to find ways to grow the industry. We can't simply rely on maintaining the Maritime Security Program, stopping attacks on the Jones Act and cargo preference, and hope that things are going to turn around. They won't, not unless we act. The United States Merchant Marine has stood by America in peace and war for over 200 years. If we want to continue to do so, it is critical that we act today and not just protect, but expand the maritime industry and our international fleet. Working together, I am confident that Congress, the administration, and the maritime industry can find solutions that will result in more trained mariners, more mariner jobs, more ships, and more cargo. All the things that are needed to keep our merchant marine sailing now and well into the future. Thank you.
Nick, that was excellent. Thank you very much for a very comprehensive overview of the problem and suggested solutions. Obviously, there's a bunch of discussion points that we would like to discuss on Q&A, but let us now introduce Ed Washburn, who's at the center of a number of those issues and has got a couple of ships that he's promised me are going to be at sea in the trade very soon from now. Ed?
That's right. Thanks. Thank you, Stas, and the audience. Hey, I'd like to start with just a shout out and expression of gratitude to the American Merchant Mariner on Maritime Day. You know, since last time we met, they've had a hell of a year. The pre-boarding requirements with testing and quarantine and getting on board and the rigorous protocols on board and maybe even restricted to ship and the confusion between local health and CDC guidelines created a lot of stress. So NICS, SIU, MEBA, MMP, AMO, everyone acted remarkably, and it was more like a duty than a job. And the Jones Act and others performed really well because of that. So we express our gratitude 100%. I do have some slides, Stas. I don't know if I'm driving or you guys are driving.
Yeah, go ahead and share your screen if you can't, and I can do a backup.
Sure thing. How are we doing there?
Yeah, you can see it.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'm sorry I missed that, Todd.
Yeah, we can see your
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is Pasha. This is George III. It's part of our Ohana class new build project in Brownsville, Texas. Keppel Amfels is building the ship. I'll go to the next slide. This is the sea trials. This was about 8 months ago. The sea trials were extremely successful. Since those sea trials, we've been commissioning the gas system, which has been a challenge in the United States. Don't anyone think that it is relatively easy to commission any new technology in the maritime industry in the United States. We get a tremendous amount of help that we don't want. It's been difficult, but we're there. We expect delivery in June, gas trials at the beginning of June. This is kind of the specs of the ship. It is a one-off. We created requirements that were specific to Hawaii. And Keppel Amfels was actually the only yard that that designed a proprietary design based on our requirements. Every other shipyard wanted to use a off-the-shelf Korean design. So that's part of the reason why we picked Keppel Amfels, which is another investment in the Jones Act. Our Jones Act requirements like the 53s in Puerto Rico and unique requirements for Hawaii and Alaska, an international ship doesn't really fit. And so there is a great expense built in America, but even greater expense to meet the requirements of the non-contiguous trade lane. To supply the fuel on this ship, we've developed and created a joint venture called West Coast Clean Fuels. This is another investment. World Fuel Services is one of our partners, as well as Clean Marine Energy. What we'll do is we're going to purchase the LNG from Clean Energy in Boron, California. We've purchased 40 ISO trailers that are good for 70-day hold time. We purchased 6 LNG powered trucks. They'll bring it to the terminal and they'll stage it in a staging area. that's been set up at Pier A in Long Beach. So they'll shuttle over 4 or 5 days and we'll get our 40 trucks full, or 40 containers full in the yard. When the vessel comes, then we'll put our skid next to the vessel. That area will become a 127, category 127 will become a bunker port, really. So on the next slide, it'll look somewhat like this. There'll be 6 trucks pumping at once. Each pump is good for 1,800 gallons a minute. There'll be a generator powering the skid that'll be pumping. It should take about 4 hours to bunker the vessel. We're planning on 8 with setup and breakdown. Permitting's all done. We have a few some methane detectors and other areas, other items to put in the staging area. But a very good project, been successful so far, and looking forward to fueling the first ship. All the contracts are in place and everything's ready to go. We've done the dry runs, and we'll do the dry run with the Coast Guard here real soon. Moving on to further investment. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the 3D model of the Horizon Reliance. This is a 1979 built last ship. We're repowering this ship. So we've removed all the machinery in the engine room and basically blasted the engine room, moved the bulkheads out, and all new foundations are in. This is a 500 project. February 28th, 2023 is delivery date. So we'll be converting the ship from steam propelled main propulsion in generation to dual fuel diesel LNG powered main engine, and also LNG powered generators. And all the equipment and auxiliary equipment will be new. The bridge will be new lifeboats. We expect to get another 20 years out of this vessel. The tanks are the same setup as the George III, and we've tried to keep the equipment the same as much as possible. A really unique project, has not been done before, steam to LNG, but going very well. Coast Guard has issued us their predetermination on coastwise eligibility. We'll maintain that. We do have the Coast Guard predetermination that it is not a major conversion, so current rules do not apply unless it's an area where we're doing modification. And we got predetermination from Customs and Border Patrol that it is a major modification, so basically tax-free or duty-free. That project's going very well. This is another investment we're making. We have quite a few terminals in the US and Hawaii. This particular setup is we did receive it's not a grant, but it's a cooperative agreement from MARAD. We're taking our Wilmington terminal, and it's basically going to be able to run without the grid. So we're changing the cranes, so when they hoist down, there's regenerative electricity that'll feed a battery storage system. We're adding 1 megawatt of solar on the rooftops, and we're putting as a demonstration project, a wind wall turbine on the top of the crane. These will power a battery system, which also could be powered from the grid, and that battery system will supply all the equipment and the cranes in the terminal. If we lose grid power and the batteries are charged, we can operate for 2 8-hour shifts, 2 cranes. We're doing the same thing in our investment in Hawaii. This is a Kapalama container terminal. It'll be the same setup. We've just applied for our PIDP grant. Monday, 2 days ago was the deadline. We're applying for the exact same setup, just much larger in scale. The goal there is that we can discharge our new ship with 2 cranes and then recharge the batteries using renewable energy. If there is a catastrophe or a natural disaster, that terminal would be able to continue running without any grid power. Moving on to kind of Hawaii specific. Well, I did want to shout out for the Jones Act, and Torey talked about this, but our reliability for the last year has been 96%, and that's based on a 10-minute interval. So if if we miss it by 10 minutes, we're late. And even in that strict criteria, we're over 96%. When we go to an hour, we're at 99.6%. And this is in real contrast to the international fleet. In our case, in most Jones Act cases, we own our own containers. Basically, we own everything from door to door. We own our containers. We have our own chassis fleet. We own our own trucks. We employ our own truck drivers. They're union truck drivers, so there's no shortage of drivers. We have American-built ships, American-owned company, American seafarers. So we get priority berthing, we get priority labor. So our supply chain system has not been disrupted at all. And actually, it's been one of the more reliable years, even through the pandemic. Again, a shout out to the mariners for that. Moving on to basically the state of Hawaii. The state of Hawaii economy is bouncing back pretty well. Visitors this year expected to top 9 million. On a regular year, it would be about 10.5 million. So it's coming back pretty well. Tourism is back. What's missing in tourism is the Asian tourists who typically spend more. We expect them to come back soon. The tourist industry is missing workers. So even though there's high inflation rate in Honolulu now, over 7.5%, Hawaii typically has about a 2.5% unemployment rate. And it's a high unemployment rate now, and there's about 13,000 missing workers. So there's some uphill battles there to meet the demands of the tourists. We do expect this summer a surge in tourism and a surge in demand. So the delivery of our new ships will be kind of just in time for that. I think that pretty well concludes it. I do have a plug for American Maritime Voices, which is American Maritime Partnership. It's their website if you're interested in following all the news about the Jones Act, and also a good promoter from military to maritime. Please sign up. It's free, and you'll get all the DC information on what's going on with the Jones Act. With that, I'll wrap it up, and thank you, Stas. I'll quit sharing.
Ed, you've got 2 ships coming. Is that the repowered one and the newly built one, or am I missing something?
We have 2 new builds coming from Keppel Brownsville, one in June and one in September. And then we'll have a 3rd LNG powered ship, which has been renamed George II, which will be coming February of 23.
That's it. Thank you very much. Okay.
Yes.
And my concern is something that you expressed, and I'll come back to this in the questions, but the ability of expeditiously getting designs approved through the alternative compliance program was promised to be a relatively delay-free process. And I know from your smile and from what you've told me that there have been some bumps on the road there. And just real briefly, we're going to start having movements for battery-powered marine propulsion, ammonia-powered marine propulsion, methanol, hydrogen. Now, if we're going to have the Chinese do all of this for us, then that'll be no problem. But if we're going to go through a U.S. alternative compliance or Coast Guard process, is there a way to make your experience more expeditious going down the line?
Well, Stas, so our new vessels are the first ones in the U.S. built under the IGF code. And we're also the first vessels where Coast Guard has allowed class under alternate compliance program to review and approve the LNG system. In our case, and I think in other carriers' case with LNG vessels in the U.S., we've had approvals as far back as 2019 in design have been approved. Ironically, some of them have been picked for oversight by the Coast Guard and have been approved, again, without comment. And now when it's time to gas, that approval has been rescinded. So I think the US bringing new technology to US shipyards is a challenge there with regulatory. Hopefully, as the process and the more ships are built, of course, the standards are not open for interpretation. But in the beginning stages, we are certainly open for interpretation, and no knock against the Coast Guard. I think they do an excellent job at life-saving, but I think their interpretation of some of the rules doesn't agree with the rest of the world and the international standards. So we're overcoming all that, but it has been a challenge.
Okay, Ed, thank you very much for that. Our last speaker, last but not least, is Captain Ann McIntyre with the San Francisco Bar Pilots. Ann is the business director and has been dealing with a number of challenging issues, including the fact that her pilots are going to need new ships. Ann, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. And I just mistakenly shut my PowerPoint presentation, so let me get it back up here. I did want to thank you for having me present here today, and also it was interesting for me to hear the inland presentations earlier in the day. You don't have anybody on here from the Pacific Northwest, but prior to coming to the pilots, I was a pilot up on the Columbia River for 23 years. And all the issues that they mentioned concerning the rivers and the locks and the dams and all that kind of stuff, it's very reminiscent of the same issues that we were dealing with when I was in the Pacific Northwest. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Not yet. Yes.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Coming up.
There we go.
So I'm going to try to get this into slideshow mode. I usually start here from the beginning.
There it is.
Okay, just a short video real quick here. This is just a pilot boarding a ship offshore at the sea buoy 11 miles west of the Golden Gate Bridge. This is a pretty calm day, but gives you a feel for kind of the danger and the agility that's required to do the job.
Whoa!
So let's start with that. And so, yeah, just a little bit. I think everybody probably knows who we are here, the San Francisco Bar Pilots. We're an association of ship captains who navigate every ship in and out of the 9 Bay Area ports. We've been in continuous operation here in San Francisco since 1850. We're the 3rd oldest business in San Francisco, and we're required by statute to provide pilotage service 24/7, 365. With all the focus on the supply chain that we've been having in these recent years, we're always like to point out that we are the bridge. We're the bridge between the Pacific Ocean and all of the Bay Area ports. We're the first person to board the ship, and we're the last person to leave it. Our on-demand service is critical to supporting the supply chain infrastructure and the California economy. We also make sure the ships get navigated safely and efficiently, supporting trade. And I think most folks are probably aware that, pilotage is highly regulated. We're mostly regulated by the state, but we're also regulated by the Coast Guard. And we're very similar to a utility in where the regulations set the rates that the consumers pay. And all the revenue that is generated that supports the pilotage operation here is generated from user fees that the carriers pay when they engage in our services. We don't receive any money from the legislature, state or federal. There's no tax money, no general funds support our operation. In San Francisco, it's considered to be one of the more dangerous pilotage grounds in the world, and it's particularly challenging in that it consists of three really distinct pilotage skills. You've got the offshore skill in the working in the swell offshore. You've got the bay transits, and then you also have river transits. So it really puts in together a lot of different skill sets, and it's pretty challenging. The bay is broad, but there's very little deep water where the ships can be moved, and there is a high density of traffic. Just a little bit about our infrastructure. Again, we're a 24/7, 365 operation. Our headquarters are at Pier 9 here in San Francisco. We have 5 pilot vessels. We've got 2 outstations in Pittsburgh and Oakland. We're currently at 50 pilots. We've got 35 union boat crew. We've got 5 union dispatchers and 6 administrative staff. Our union is SUP, and we also have one MEBA member, our port engineer. This is another thing everybody's probably familiar with, but I like the graphics, so I always show it. This is just how big the ships have gotten these days. And so, when you look at the big container ships that are coming in right now, they are longer than the Salesforce Tower is tall. And that really kind of puts things into perspective as far as the challenge of the job and the way the flow of containers is coming in and out of the bay. This central to our mission on the front lines. I don't know, I think most of you are probably aware we had a big fire up at the Benicia port, and this is just another quick video. When this fire happened, we had to quickly dispatch 3 pilots out to the ports to get the ships away from the dock. And this again is something that is very critical in having pilots available 24/7 to respond immediately. So just a quick, another quick video here. So I'll move on from that. So that's just kind of another day in the life of a pilot. And, just again,
that must have been an exciting day in the life of those pilots.
I think it was, yeah. And it, again, it's you never quite know what you're going to go to. And that day it was pretty exciting. The good news from that incident was that we were concerned that it was going to shut the terminal down, but they were able to get things open. I think it just took about a week to begin receiving ships there again. So the damage wasn't as bad as it could have been. Moving on just to being on the front lines, and again, where we find ourselves today, with the supply chain crisis and, the associated economic conditions. When the Grand Princess came in, we were that was kind of the beginning of all the COVID here on the West Coast. And we were the first person to go on board it and bring it in when there were still a lot of unknowns there. And we're still experiencing, these conditions on board the ships today. And this is just a picture of on another ship a year later, with the crews are still, working in some pretty challenging conditions. More about the pilots. Central to our mission is protecting and preserving the environment, within the Bay Area. I'm not sure everybody realizes that, 90% of the state's marshlands reside within the Bay. And so again, the safe navigation, prevention of oil pollution is primary to our mission. As is, protecting the public, safety and security. There's a lot of recreational vessels that we make sure that ships are passing those safely. And because we're out there 24/7, 365, we're kind of the eyes and ears on the Bay as well. And this is, again, I just had this in my presentations about the supply chains. You know, we just recently brought in the MS Sienna. It was the largest ship to ever call Oakland. And again, we're all part of the industry and we understand this, but that ship can carry, you know, over 19,000 containers. And when you put those containers end for end, that's 73 miles. And so again, that just kind of, it's a good short way to explain why we have all the problems moving things through the ports, on our highways, and on our railroads. Again, you know, in our port that we serve, we've got a large diversity of cargo, which is good to have the mix. You know, we've got containers, we've got oil, we've got cars, and bulk products, project cargo. So in the Bay Area, we do have, you know, a good mixed economy, and I think that is important. Stas had asked me to talk about some of the challenges that we're experiencing right now. And, you know, with the supply chain disruption, we've experienced a significant revenue decline. The Port of Oakland was getting bypassed, mostly due to the big delays down in LA, Long Beach, where ships were just returning back to Asia to get containers rather than making their stops here. So just, you know, compared to a normal year, our revenue is down 33%. And we're in a position where, you know, again, all our fees are generated by the ships that call. We have a statutory requirement to provide on-demand service, and we've really been struggling to continue to keep our service levels. And that's not unusual. That's been happening with a lot of pilot organizations throughout the United States. And with all the infrastructure funding, no pilot organization received any of the infrastructure funding. And, you know, we've expressed a lot of concern that there's a lot of focus on shoreside infrastructure, but people really aren't looking at the waterside infrastructure of ports as much as they should beyond the dredging. And I just thought that is important to point out, just in light of the, you know, the conversations that have been occurring here today. You know, combined with that, California Air Resources Board has been implementing some pretty aggressive regulations that are going to be impacting the replacement of our pilot boat fleet. Our pilot boat fleet is all going to age out by 2028, and 3 of the boats by 2024. And it's a $50 million build program. It's difficult to, you know, to even, you know, meet that timeline, let alone, you know, find a place to build it, and then, you know, have the funding in place to have all that happen in such a short period of time. It's going to be pretty impactful on our pilotage fees and the customers that call here. And just in general, this is something, I don't know if you guys have discussed it on, you know, some of your other panels, but just, you know, just general support, you know, particularly here in California for maritime infrastructure and, you know, industrial uses and trade is, it's becoming more and more difficult to, you know, to do business. And I think that the ballpark situation with the Port of Oakland is a real good example of that. It's concerning to us that there isn't the recognition that there needs to be regarding how important maritime trade is to our economy, to our, you know, our workforce and good jobs. And it's a problem, and it's unfortunate that it doesn't receive more recognition. One of the other issues we're dealing with, and that is something that has been discussed here today, is, you know, future pilot recruitment, and in line with that, diversity. With the decline in US flagged ships, I mean, I think we're down to like 90 ships right now, you know, deep sea ships. Our pool of pilots is becoming increasingly small. And again, we're just starting to consider, what we're going to have to do if we can't recruit from our normal pool of experienced mariners. And it's going to be a challenge. All the pilot groups in the United States are recruiting from the same small pool of candidates. We have a lot of retirements, and there just does not seem to be the interest in these jobs that there used to be. And, in line with that is diversity. We've really been trying to diversify our ranks, but it's very difficult to do because the pipeline is not diverse. And, whether that starts at a maritime academy, or if it starts, unlicensed on deck, moving up through the pipelines, we need to be doing more to diversify our ranks. And again, these are issues that we're working on, but it's been interesting to me to hear through this the conversations that are having, is a lot of the themes that are being touched on are also issues that we're working on as well. I'm going to stop my screen share now because I can't see anybody except my PowerPoint here. So I don't know if I'm just like talking into the ether.
No, you're not.
Yeah. So now I can see everybody again. And I hope I've given you just, kind of a little bit of insight into some of the challenges that we're facing and who we are and what we do.
And thank you very much for that. And I want to start with the diversity issue, which I believe is part of our problem in terms of long-term recruitment. John Hark has shown up here, which I'm glad he has, because I want him to comment on that too. But you and I had a conversation last week in which we were talking about the atmosphere at the maritime schools and through the industries, and the challenges for women and people of color. And I know that in your day, things were a lot tougher than they are today, and that women who went through the pioneering part of the process feel that it's not as bad as it used to be, but it's certainly still showing up on our radar screen. And as you are aware, CAPtain has run a number of stories about sexual harassment and racial harassment at some of our maritime schools. And obviously, those are not just isolated incidents when we see them in a number of different places. I'd like to ask you, as a start off, what can we do more, and should we be doing more to improve that pipeline?
Yes and yes. I mean, I think that we can do more, and I think we should be doing more. And the outreach on that, it begins with awareness, but it really, I think it's going to take a lot of strong mentoring and programs with high schools to get young people interested in those careers. It's still pretty hidden. And we found generally, like we'll go and give presentations at schools and to the Sea Scouts and this and that. And it's great, and it makes an awareness, but it doesn't necessarily result in the diversity of candidates that we would like to see. And I think it really just becomes you have to support people all the way through the programs. And just speaking to the to some of the incidents that have happened on board the ships and at the schools, so much of that I think is a result of trying to make a more diverse group of people fit within a structure that has existed for a long time. It's kind of this military, hierarchical structure of how things work. And I don't know if I'm doing a very good job of explaining myself, but I think a lot of that stuff really needs to be looked at from the ground up, and it's going to take, very bold and broad change in just how how the systems function. And I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I just like the example that I kind of go back to, like when I started at the Maritime Academy, we all wore the men's uniforms and they tailored them into the way the men, they didn't have like women's uniforms. We were being put into a system and integrated into a system, as opposed to having a system that was designed to accommodate.
Okay.
We had to have our hair cut the same way, all kinds of things like that. It's just, and we're still, and I mean, for me, that's just 30 years later, and I see Laura Covery is on here as well, is that, the systems need to change. It's not necessarily having the diversity candidates meld themselves into the system.
Okay, and you prompted me to Captain Laura Covery. This is an issue that is near and dear to your heart. Would you like to comment?
Well, it's interesting that Anne brings up the issue of uniforms, because when I started there, the women had to wear the Navy enlisted women's uniform, which was blue. We had to wear dark blue pants and a light blue, very lightweight shirt and a light cardigan sweater. And it was very cold in Vallejo. And I asked if I could buy one of the men's jackets just to be warm, and they refused. They told us that they would not give us, that it was not our uniform, and we couldn't have the jackets. So they pulled a lot of interesting things. I actually was the one who pushed fervently for khakis, even though I hate khakis. I wanted us to at least assimilate into the group and not be singled out as a blue uniform in a sea of khakis. So yeah, it was a challenge when we would go to what was it? I want to say Terminal Island, Treasure Island, for things like firefighting and saving the Buttercup. All of the young men in the maritime uniforms were saluted, and the young women in the blue uniforms, people would walk over to us. If I had my hat under my arm, the Navy guys would walk up and start screaming at me. And I just hold up my hat in their face and I said, I am not in the Navy, leave me alone. But it was a challenge. It was a real challenge. So yeah, we went through a lot of growing pains early on. And I have been very outspoken about harassment on the ships and at school. And my honest opinion is that a lot of the attitudes are developed at the schools. That's where, so many of the officers come from. And I did find that working on the ships, the unlicensed folks were much more accepting and much kinder. Once they knew that you knew the job, they would do anything for you. Whereas the officers trained at the academies were most of the problem that I ran into. So it's just, yeah, we need to start at the schools. We need to change the attitudes there. And when I remember I think it was in the 1980s, probably around Anne's time, they were, the percentages at Cal Maritime were like 20 to 22% women. And then it went backwards. We went backwards, which was a little bit mind-boggling. But again, I think a lot of it is that we weren't addressing the issues that we needed to address.
Okay. Ed, I'm going to ask you, here we are trying to bring in younger people into our workforce. And we're still hearing about these issues at the maritime schools 30 years after they should have been over. What is your feeling about how we move forward here?
Well, I think making progress is very slow. I'm ironically or fortunately a trustee with Cal Maritime, and this is addressed at every meeting. It's one of the top priorities for sure. I think for our company, it's a very high priority. We're lucky that our pool, we have a high pay and a very nice run, so people are attracted to our vessels, and so we have a little more diversity on the vessels, which is certainly, if you have a Persian Gulf run, it's harder to find people that are diverse, so people that want those jobs. But I agree with Ann and Laura that the schools probably have to change their system, and I also agree. I think the unlicensed personnel are more accepting, which proves that the schools are really the foundation for some of the not accepted attitudes, I think. For our company, we were one of the first commercial carriers to be completely enrolled in the Embark, which we're very proud of. And I was recently invited by Lucinda Leslie, Acting Maritime Administrator, to be on the advisory council for USMMA. So hopefully we can do some help there also.
Okay. John Hark, you and I have been talking about this problem of workforce development and some of the challenges, and we have an issue that you've heard about in the discussion related to women. You teach at Texas A&M. How are you guys addressing this issue?
Well, it's certainly an issue that we want to make sure isn't happening, obviously, with our academy. I think, though, back to the diversity, what we're doing in the Houston area, we talked about this on the panel earlier this year, which I think is a good model for other areas of the country. We've got 9 area high schools now in the Houston region that have maritime logistics programs that create that pathway. And the Port of Houston has a nonprofit, Port Houston Partners in Maritime Education, which really is the center of this effort. And so they've got the political power and the time and consistency in the region, but we're reaching out and into the high schools and to the junior high and even to the elementary schools and letting the parents know about these jobs that they're available for their kids. And it's taken a long time, but we're seeing success. And for Nick and what they've got up at Paul Hall, Houston always has, from our region, 2 or 3 of our high school students go up to that center, as well as going to the maritime academies or going into the Brownwater side with Kirby and other companies in our San Jack College here in the Houston area too. So we've got a mature program. I'm always open to talking to other people around the country, but Stas, you and I have talked about it. The port plays a major role. The port can have influence with the state capitals. The ports can have influence with the boards, of education as well. And we've got a critical mass in the Houston region now. It didn't happen overnight, but we're certainly seeing a more diverse pipeline of talent coming in. I think the other thing is not just the mariners, but for what Ed's been talking about, and Stas, you and I talked about this as well, other countries are sort of leapfrogging past us with all this new technology. When we talk about decarbonization, autonomy, remote, digitalization, things like that. So we need to have more young people even coming into the engineering and design work in the STEM fields as well, to be able to design these things and to stay up with the rest of the world, to stay competitive. When we talk about, as Sal talked about in the last panel 2 days ago, these one-offs, or as he said, a work of art. And you and I said, it's sort of like a production sport fish boat and a custom sport fish boat. And, if the commercial vessels are one-off works of art, as Sal referred to it, how do you get that economies of scale? How do you get to the point where we can produce them a lot more efficiently and better cost. But when they're one-offs, it's extremely difficult to do. So it comes down to people, and it's people to go on the ships, and it's people to go into this field. And the U.S. government has already got statistics that show in the transportation bucket, 26% of the workforce is over 55, and 10,000 people turn 65 every day in the U.S. And that's what we're fighting. So, I mean, those of us on this screen are concerned with maritime and logistics and seafarers. Well, we're competing with a bunch of other industries in that same, lack of people. So we have to reach out early. And I'm proud of what we're doing in the Houston area. And again, anybody wants to talk to me about the model we've got here and how can it be applied in other parts of the country, feel free to reach out. But it's taken a while, but we're getting some critical mass in the Houston region, and it's paying off.
Thank you very much, John. Torey? In terms of recruitment and bringing in new people into the workforce?
Yes. Well, we operate one vessel, Stas, and it's managed by Crowley Technical Services out of Jacksonville. We have been a partner actually for the last 9 years. We've had cadets. Also from Texas A&M, but Kings Point and Mass. So we have cadets. We've had a diverse group. Diversity, actually today sailing in our officers, we've got two females in the engine department and a couple and a cadet. So the training is with Crowley on the diversity side, and Stas, I don't know. I took diversity training in 1996 at APL over in Oakland. It was big then, and it's extremely important today as it is, and just how to treat people, for God's sake. So, it's manners is a lot of it as well. So people maybe haven't had the experience or have been used to maybe habits that are not acceptable today, and culturally we need to address those and be aware of them. And just awareness training is important. Diversity training is important. The SASH program that the Marriott's put forward and the cooperative has put forth is all important. Just raising our awareness that we have to have new standards.
Very good. Thank you, Tori. Nick?
Could I just touch on one thing just real quickly?
Please.
That just on what Laura said. And it was once they knew I could do the job. And the point is that when men go on to the ship, they're not questioned whether they can do the job. It's assumed they can do the job. And so there's a whole level of a different dynamic of having to prove yourself and that you're worthy of being there. And so I just, that struck home with me, and I just thought it was important to mention that.
Yeah, I agree with that, Anne, and it was always a challenge, and not, you're right, it's not fair, it's not equal, but the idea that at least with the unlicensed, they were willing to accept me, whereas it didn't matter if I could do the job or not. The licensed, the majority, I won't say all, the majority of the licensed officers would still give me a bad time.
All right. Nick, you guys are addressing this issue at Paul Hall and in your training and in your recruitment. Are you making progress?
Yes, we're making a lot of progress, and this has been part of our educational system going back to 1978 when I was the port agent at our school in Piney Point, and we brought our first class of girls in. We had 5 girls we had to integrate into our program. I think one of the main differences here when we mentioned the licensed and the unlicensed character. The unlicensed character is a blue-collar worker. We don't feel superior, and we're not educated to hold the authority that the licensed officers are taught. And I think that sometime that training of authority without some parameters, and having that ability and authority gets way over in their heads, and they abuse it. So from the unlicensed perspective, we're taught to follow orders. We teach our members that we are all brothers and sisters, and we're going to treat each other alike. And for this conversation, fortunately for us, we don't carry that authoritative aura that allows us to abuse that authority.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. I want to touch on, go to a different place right now and about shipbuilding. I believe that shipbuilding and new U.S. flagged ships is about to become a national security and a commercial priority that it hasn't been in a long time. And International President Jim Patti, as I mentioned at the beginning of our session this morning, made a strong appeal for this in his welcoming remarks yesterday, on Monday. And he said essentially that with the national security situation that we're facing abroad, the growing tensions with China, that we need to ensure that our supply lines and our trade lanes are adequately represented by US flag, US crewed ships. And that, of course, is not everybody's feeling. Lars Jensen made the statement that maybe this should be sourced from allied shipping, which is a distinction that we would have to define. But we are coming into an era where we are going to be deploying ships with zero emission fuels. John Hark talked about the automated factors in the ships, the need for developed electronics, for major changes in the technology. And we referenced earlier on that there were possibilities for US ships of 2,500 TEUs to be deployed in the Oakland to Asia trade for around $2,000 going outbound and maybe $4,000 inbound. Bo Breistrup is gone, but I asked him to do a short analysis of what we could do between Oakland and LA. And his very preliminary projection was that 2 1,000 TEU ships, if they could be built for $65 million, which I know is a stretch, Ed, at 80% capacity, could deliver a container between LA and Oakland, factoring in the lift charges for around $1,675. And the trucking rate is now at $3,000. And I would also reference that time is a big issue for getting, especially in the last 18 months, getting your product out of the ports. And you are all aware that the dwell times at the ports of LA and Long Beach for trucks are running around 7 to 8 days, and rail the same amount. And my question to Ed and Torey is it about time that we started talking about marine highway ships for the coastal trade, as well as Hawaii, Alaska, and Puerto Rico? So Ed, maybe I'll start with you.
I think the answer is yes, Stas. Certainly it's going to be more efficient. However, I do have to question the LA to Oakland. We have a ship every week leaving with only 110 loads going from Oakland to LA. And we have room for 800 more. So anyone on this call who needs a ship from LA to Oakland, please come.
Good, Ed.
Until that demand is there, you're not going to get the investment, right? And that's really what it's going to take. It's kind of like the LNG, the chicken and the egg. Someone has to make the first move. But I think if you're going to finance a vessel, you're going to have the commitment for the cargo, and that's going to be that's the linchpin in the whole thing. I would love to see more ships going up and down the coast. I think it makes perfect sense. I'm not sure what all the barriers are other than cost. But the answer is yes, we should be looking at that.
Is this maybe a time where the Maritime Administration needs to step up and take a stronger role with the ports in the context of the fact that it is already providing maritime infrastructure grants that maybe instead of putting more and more stuff on the road, that maybe in some places they could be getting the ports to be more focused on coastal trades?
I would say yes again, Stas, right? And I think every one of us on this call can identify an area where coastal trade makes perfect sense. That's being replenished with trucks, and a barge or a ship could do that very easily. I want to go back to your 2,500 TEU and the international trade. With the current supply chain, that is probably the perfect ship, because you can't bring in a 10,000 TEU ship and just overload the terminal, right? So at least in our experience, you're better dropping off 400 containers at every port down the West Coast and getting out of there. But yeah, so I'm on a tangent here, but I think, yes, we should be looking at the marine highway stats.
Thank you, Ed. Torey?
Yeah, no, it's as we've all talked about over the years, Stas, it has been a struggle with the American Marine Highway. It started with the harbor maintenance tax, and it just cascaded down. The 53 as a standard truck unit is the equipment of choice. So when you come in with a 40 and a 20, or maybe a 45, a 96 inch, you're still outside that. So you really have to focus on what you want to feed. If you want to alleviate the congestions, yes, we've seen in Houston when we started the M10, and that's Houston to Port Everglades, but it was also the head haul in the right direction. Trucks don't like to go from Miami back to Houston. The head haul is eastbound. And we were successful, quasi-successful, in the fact that we're always trading in a head haul, and we're continuing on to Puerto Rico. So I think if you can do something like that to, look at the non-contiguous trades, Puerto Rico on the East Coast and Hawaii on the West Coast, that maybe you can have an option of feeding a place like Jacksonville with an M95 from New York, or an M10 from Houston, that all meets up in Florida for that. So there is an opportunity there, but they're hard to find. They're not easy to find. And it's, people are used to calling a truck 5 times, any time of the day. Now things have changed. The supply chain being broken, now people are looking at alternatives. So that's refreshing. So the time is right for this to launch into the American Marine Highway program. And it might be launched by the big international guys. And then you get into the whole Jones Act thing, and then you talk about, which I heard for the first time, allied sourcing with the ships. But anyway, so that's my 2 cents on it. But timing is right now to expand on marine highways and get the bad stuff off the road. The long haul trucker doesn't want to do that anymore. He wants to be home for dinner. And the intermodal, if you do a JB Hunt model on the water side and the intermodal side on the water side, it makes a lot of sense. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay.
John, if I could just add to that for a second. We're very good at preaching to the choir and creating documents and plans, but what we're not good at is selling our program.
Yeah.
Cargo is the key to any successful marine highway program or short sea shipping, and you have got to get with the people that control the cargo. We put these programs together. We don't advertise it to the shippers or the consignees, the exporters. We don't do anything in that regard. We don't give any tax incentives to our domestic companies to use these more effective modes of transportation so that they can see a credit and a benefit all the way around. We create these things, we say, here it is, and nobody goes out and sells it. So I hope moving forward, and I agree with Torey 100%, that right now, unfortunately, due to this congestion problems we have in our logistics chain, that we're not, the industry is starting to think about this due to this anomaly that has come along.
Okay.
Why didn't we start doing this 20 years ago? I don't know. We need good salespeople. That's what the Maritime Administration should be doing. Going out, talking to importers and exporters and getting them sold on these programs.
I need Nick Marrone to go to Washington. I think that's what.
Oh, I've been there already. You know what? It's like I said, talking to this brick.
Okay, we have a question from John Lee. John, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful. You guys, I really love you guys, and ladies. So Ed and Tori, I was wondering what it would take for you guys to partner up with some of these foreign carriers that is skipping the Port of Oakland to use your ships, these clean ships, to take containers from LA to the inland waterways. I understand that you yourself have containers that is about 100 containers coming up from LA, but if you wanted to fully utilize that, you would probably want to take other carrier containers as well.
Ed?
Sure. Okay, Ms. Sung Lee. So I think our business acumen is we like difficult stuff, and if we can make money, we'll do it. So if there is an opportunity for a feeder service, we 100% would be in. I do want to clarify when I say we're going from Oakland to LA with 110 boxes on board, we're also delivering our empties to be restocked in LA to get to Hawaii. So we really can't give up on all that space. So we do need our empty containers in LA. Yeah, what would it take? It would take like Nick says, it'd take a commitment and enough of a commitment to make the investment, and then it would happen. It's really just as simple as that. Ironically, we some of the international carriers recognize the reliability and the skipping the line for the Jones Act, and we're contacting quite a bit about can they drop their containers in Hawaii and put them on our ship and skip the line and go right to LA or Oakland. We're not entertaining that now because we do have to restock our empties on the West Coast. But if it was if the terms were more than a couple months, we'd probably look into creating a business around it. It's the commitment and the cargo commitment.
So Ed, I want to ask you, Nick has said there's a number of programs out there that are designed to encourage more US uses and they're not being utilized. And yet we've seen this marine highway thing has been around for, I think Tori's pointed out, almost 20 years. What do we need to do to change the paradigm? The paradigm is, how bad does it have to get before you can put a box on a US flag ship?
Yeah, well, a US flag ship is competitive in the international market now, right? So we can charter a ship internationally, and we probably will do that this fall, and be competitive. So there is no paradigm shift right now. A US ship can operate, especially in the Trans-Pacific, and make money, right?
Okay.
It's the term of the commitment, and no one wants to bet on how long these high rates are going to last, especially with the inflation and the Ukrainian war. And so there's a lot of hesitance to make a long-term commitment and get the investment. So you can start that service with the US flag ship, which we would like to do.
So we heard from Sal Mercogliano on Monday that a number of ready reserve vessels are on their last legs, and that there was an exercise in which one of the ships actually broke down and had to stop in Bermuda because these ships are all 40 years old. So I'm wondering if there's 40 ships in that fleet that we could start with getting rid of, whether that's a place to, that's a departure point.
You know, it may it's not necessary to get rid of them. A lot of those ships can be repurposed, and I'm gonna go right back to Ed, who's doing that right now with a 40-year-old ship in China. Those hulls are in great shape and they qualify for American made. You could maybe do something for less than 150 million in repurposing those vessels. It's a gutting, you gotta gut them all out, but that steel is good.
My feeling is that we need a shipbuilding program. And I know that that's a longer term commitment here, and it's going a little bit beyond what we're talking about, but we need a shipbuilding program that gives the ability of long-term commitments with a US government-sponsored support system. And as you guys know, the exporters, the US exporters, and John Lee knows this, have been beating down the doors. AgTC's been very active trying to get the foreign flag people to do something different after they supported the deregulation that helped get us into this situation. And I'm wondering whether it is time for us to be talking, at least amongst ourselves, about a long-term program where we're talking about building 20 or 30 ships for either a coastal or a trans-Pacific or transatlantic trade, and whether we need to be starting to do these things so we don't just have to deal with things that are, you know, the most immediate.
Stas, so no pun intended, but when you mentioned MARAD and refleeting the Ready Reserve Fleet, we missed the boat. So the vessel acquisition manager RFP is out and has been awarded, and they will refleet 29 ships in 15 years by purchasing foreign and reflagging in the US.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
but those are, Stas, those are for foreign commerce, right, Ed? You can't use those in the Jones Act.
No, this is the refleeting of the Ready Reserve Fleet, the gray ships.
These are non-commercial. They sit there in case we need them.
Right. And I guess one of my questions is whether with the problems we have with our exporters may not go away. I mean, you've heard about the situation in Oakland, and we're all hoping that things will go back to normal. But if they don't, are US ships a possibility? And that I heard you say that market under certain circumstances is a possibility.
Yeah, we have had discussions with John Garamonde, and we think it is a possibility with commitment.
Okay. Well, I think we have reached if does anybody have any last questions or points? I think we've run our course here. If not, I want to thank our panelists, Ed Washburn, Torey Presti, and McIntyre, and Nick Marrone for their presentations. Thank you all for having stayed on. It's been a 3-hour trip this morning. But I reiterate, I think that the supply chain crisis is creating possibilities for us. And I think that we should pursue them. And I think that the Maritime Administration needs to take a more active and aggressive role. I think we need to do more about diversity. I think we have to have a shipbuilding program. And I think the Title 11 program, frankly, sucks. Excuse my French, that it is discriminatory towards startups and new entries. And it only helps people who don't need those ships, don't need the money. So I see Ed shaking his head, so we'll move on with that. Guys, thank you all very much. I hope we will be back again next year. Good luck and best wishes for your maritime prospects, for your new ships. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Stas.
Great. Thank you very much, Stas.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Take care and see you soon.